Hello and welcome to our 10th, I think, episode of the RAW Sport Quaran-Stream, or at least the penultimate week of what would have been would have been term 3. I am your head of sport, Josh Sim, and I unfortunately was not here last week, but a big shout out, and we've got him coming on obviously, but big shout out to Joe Spagnoli for hosting last week. It went really well, and and we're back with a lot more football to talk about than a month ago, that's for sure. And what we're going to do, this isn't going to be a Super Saturday stream. I'll just outline that. We've got something slightly different. We're going to do a bit of a chat show and talk about all the football that's been going on, while also getting live updates from the number of games that are going on at the moment. And one game that's already kicked off in Spain is in La Liga, is the game between Espanyol and Levante, and we'll bring on someone who has been watching that game since the kickoff, which was about half an hour ago, and that's Luke Edwards. Luke, I guess this is now an exciting period because one, you've got no uni work to worry about, and two, you've got a whole lot of football going on all everywhere you look across Europe.
Yeah, almost too much football going on because they've staggered all the kickoffs as well, which means that there is football on all the time, which I'm loving. I'm absolutely loving it. So I'm watching this game, Espanyol Levante. Espanyol very much in a relegation dogfight at the minute, right in amongst it. They were bottom of the league by 6 points from safety at the start of the start of the restart. And they've managed to claw themselves off to the bottom spot. They picked up a draw and a win in their past 2 games, which is pretty good by their standards. They've got a new manager, a guy called Abelardo. He's come in and has really fixed them. They're currently drawing 1-1 with Levante, which is probably about fair. Looking at the statistics, it's been about fair, and just general eye for the game, it's been a relatively even match. So Levante took the lead inside the first 15 minutes. Goal from Borja Mayoral. It was his 5th goal of the season. He's been kind of the understudy to the star striker Roger Marti, who's had so many plaudits in La Liga this year. He scored a lot of goals. But he was able to break through Espanyol's defence and finish very cleanly. Then toward sort of midway through the first half, Espanyol were able to claw the goal back. It actually came from a long throw from their centre back, Leandro Cabrera. He launched the ball into the box, and David Lopez, the other centre back, was able to just prod it home for Espanyol, making them level. They kind of could do with a win in this game. I'm expecting, as it's sort of entering the end of, or midway through the second half now, and I'm expecting that Espanyol will try to go for the win. A draw does something for them. A lot of the teams around them are losing a lot of points, so they're breaking even, and Espanyol are kind of able to slowly close the gap in that sense. But a win would really put pressure on the other relegation stragglers like Celta Vigo, who haven't had a good start at all since the restart. Espanyol desperate for the win. It's going to be a really interesting closing stage. We've got a lot of good games coming up later on today as well. So the relegation battle, I'd say, in La Liga is probably one of the most interesting narratives we've got going on across European football. Lots of teams involved, lots of good teams involved, and a few off-the-field controversies as well, which is something that I'm sure we'll discuss later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as you said, I mean, you look at the table, and I know we'll get into some La Liga discussion in just a moment. But
I've got some news actually, Josh, because Levante have scored.
There we go.
It's now 2-1 to Levante, which is an absolutely massive blow to Espanyol. I haven't actually seen the goal because I was too busy focusing on the stream, but it's been scored by their left winger Enis Bardi, who has actually had a pretty good game so far. He's been one of their major threats, so there's no real surprises there. Levante back on the attack, and Espanyol able to just clear it. But yeah, massive setback to Espanyol. They could really do with at least a point in this match. It's just all the pressure on them now to go and try and rescue something from this game.
Yeah, and I know there'll be some people who maybe they've watched Europa League and they go, oh wow, but Espanyol a Europa League team, and obviously there's a lot more to that about how they've gone from the Europa League spots rather to now fighting for their lives essentially for survival. But yeah, as you said, that's a big development, and we will see what happens if they can claw themselves back into this game with about 20 minutes or so to go. So you've got that game to watch, and I understand. We also have you keeping an eye on what's been a regular feature. You've become a
I've
big
adopted Hertha Berlin. I know.
Yeah.
Ever since we started, yeah, because I think they were just the first team I watched on. Did a stream from when we were doing the Bundesliga streams. They won. They beat Hoffenheim 3-0. Which is a horrible game to do when considering I knew nothing about German football, and I had two teams that both began with H, both played in the same colours, and both had players with very similar names. And yeah, it was absolutely nightmare to cover. But Hertha Berlin, yeah, I've just been watching a lot of them because they're a really entertaining team off the pitch. They've had about 3 different managers this year. They've spent a ridiculous amount of money on players who haven't quite worked out in some cases. But they've also got some very entertaining players to watch. I'm a massive fan of Mateusz Cunha, who they brought in from Leipzig in January, and he's come in and made an absolute massive difference to the squad. He's a very entertaining player to watch. They've also got a Liverpool player on loan as well, so that is, in Marco Grujic, so it just makes them even more appealing for me to watch. And I'm looking forward to keeping an eye on them later, as well as keeping an eye on some of Leverkusen's top talents, like the likes of Kai Havertz, who's been linked with Chelsea quite a lot recently. I know he's been linked with Liverpool in the past, he's been linked with Bayern Munich, but Chelsea have kind of emerged as new runners for his signature. It's going to be interesting to see if he's worth all the hype.
Yeah, and we will again get on to Chelsea when we cover the Premier League in a bit, about how I mean the Timo Werner move. We've spoken about it a few weeks ago, but that's now officially happening. And we've also got they're also who are they? They're in action, and I can't for the life of me remember who they're playing. They're playing Aston Villa. That's it. They're playing Aston Villa this weekend as well. We will get to that as well. So we will actually bring you on in just a bit. We'll bring you on in just a bit. We'll just take you out and talk to the other live sort of updates game that we've got to focus on. Is speaking of the Bundesliga. It's the league. Sure, the title is heading to Bayern Munich, but I mean, Joe Spagnoli, and you join us now. I mean, this game is huge for deciding who's the runners up in this league, who, the best of the rest, essentially.
It could also basically define the success of seasons for both of these teams. We're talking about RB Leipzig versus Borussia Dortmund over in East Germany today. I'll take you through the lineups in a second. At the moment, the two teams are divided by 3 points in the table as we reach the business end of the season. Neither Nagelsmann's Leipzig nor Lucien Favre's Dortmund have been able to take the title away from Bayern Munich. They've now won 8 Bundesliga titles in a row, confirmed. But this afternoon, this game could potentially swing the direction of second place in the Bundesliga table. So for Leipzig, they line up with Peter Galacci in goal, a back four of Halstenberg, Upamecano, Klostermann, with Nordi Michele played out at right back. 3 deep midfielders, Kevin Campbell in between Angelino, moving from left back to left midfield, and Marcel Sabitzer. Emil Forsberg supporting the 2 strikers, Timo Werner, as you've just said, Chelsea bound, and Patrick Schick, who they are trying to negotiate a permanent transfer for from Roma. Moving over to Borussia Dortmund, Roman Bürki starts in goal. It's the regular 3-4-3 that Favre has been employing in the last few months, with Emre Can, Mats Hummels and Łukasz Piszczek at the 3 centre-backs, Rafael Guerrero and Murray out wide instead of Achraf Hakimi, with Axel Witsel and Julian Brandt in midfield. Torgan Hazard on the left, Giovanni Reina on the right, and Erling Braut Haaland making something of a surprise start. He's usually deployed as something of a super sub in this game. Of course, he was responsible last weekend for the 96th minute winner at Fortuna Düsseldorf, the last embers of Borussia Dortmund's title fight. But at the moment, they are in somewhat of inconsistent form and little action so far in the game. But if Leipzig win this, of course, they do go second in the table with not much of the season remaining. Yeah, and I think because we are a student radio station from the UK, obviously the big thing stands out is no Jadon Sancho, at least in the starting lineup. And then by contrast, then Gio Reyna's start also stands out because he was meant to start against Schalke. He then had, I think it was illness or an injury in the warm-up that ruled him out. And unfortunately, he hasn't been able to reclaim his starting spot. But with the league, I don't want to say the conclusion's obviously sewn up because they are fighting to keep second place. Lucien Favre has decided to put a lot of trust in him and give him a start in what is now probably, there's only 2 weeks left, but it is the game of
the remaining season, really, the game of the next 2 weeks.
It's certainly the game of today, of course. For the first time, I think we've got all 9 Bundesliga fixtures on at the same time, something of a German regular Super Saturday across the entire league. Jadon Sancho is on the bench today, as is Nico Schulz, as is Zagadou. So they've got plenty of talent on the bench, but it's not like Leipzig haven't got it either. You know, Dani Olmo, who they brought in January from, I think it was Dinamo Zagreb, he's looked fantastic. He's obviously a talent you can bring off the bench. Tyler Adams, Amadou Haidara, Ibrahim Konate, like, the amount of substitutions you're allowed to make in the Bundesliga in these COVID-affected conditions, the dynamics of this game could shift an awful lot. But if Borussia Dortmund want to win this, best thing they can do is start early on. Giovanni Reina, when he has played, has been very impressive. Sure, not on the level of Jadon Sancho, but you don't want to be relying on the last half hour or so in the second half in order to control the game. Favre, if he wants to get this second place and hold on to that position as Borussia Dortmund manager going into next season, you know, winning this game is the most important thing. I'll be keeping an eye on it. As you know, we'll be talking about other football from around the continent that's happened this week, but this promises to be an absolutely thrilling game. A lot of possession play at the moment, very little in the way of clear-cut chances. Dortmund moving forward, making the most of their width, but Leipzig are actually defending very well from wide positions. So it's going to be a close game, but someone needs to take advantage of it in the first half, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll bring Luke Edwards back. And the way it will work for everyone, is basically we will be talking about all the various five major leagues that are going on. And sorry, apologies for League One, but you've decided to cancel before, making that decision to cancel. So unfortunately, we can't have you in this mix, but we will talk about the 5 leagues. We'll start with La Liga and probably the Bundesliga, since those 2 we are covering at the moment, and then we'll move to the Premier League and Serie A probably near the end, because that officially starts tonight. And then as I've said to these guys, they will interrupt if there's a goal or a major event or whatever. That's how it'll work for those who are watching along at home. So I guess, let's start with La Liga. Seemingly that is Luke Edwards' I guess it's like comfort food, but I guess it's your comfort football. It's like, it's the thing that kind of, when you're down, it cheers you up. We'll kind of do a rough week roundup of sorts. So we start at the top, and as I showed before, so Barcelona, they've played 3 games since our last stream. They beat Mallorca 4-0 on Sunday. Then they defeated Leganés at home 2-0 as well. And then last night, in fact, they played out a goalless draw at Sevilla. I guess my first question, and I'll ask Luke Edwards. I guess they seemed really good. Like, they didn't seem too rusty at all for the first 2 games, at least. And then obviously last night, Sevilla are obviously a different animal compared to Leganés and Mallorca. And they weren't as clinical enough, or they certainly were able to create some sort of chances, but they weren't able to break down that really organized Sevilla defense.
I have to admit, I didn't watch the Sevilla game. I didn't watch the Leganés game, but I did watch the Mallorca game. And against Mallorca, they were just so on it. Mallorca haven't had the best of seasons. They started pretty strongly relative to the quality they have in their side. They're newly promoted from Segunda Division, but they do not have any real quality at the minute. They've really struggled since the turn of the year. They're in a position where it's likely they're going to get relegated, particularly given the form and the quality of the teams around them. It was never really going to end well for them against Barcelona. Barcelona absolutely dominated them from start to finish. Lionel Messi just showing yet again just how much I've missed watching him play. He's such a wonderful player, and having Luis Suarez back in the side as well has been a really big deal for Barca. I saw some of the highlights from the game against Sevilla. Not too many chances created, albeit we could have seen a goal from Luis Suarez. We could have also seen a goal potentially from Sergio Reguilón on the side of Sevilla. But unfortunately for them, the shot came onto his right foot as opposed to his favoured left. Overall, draw is probably the fair result. I don't think Barcelona did enough to warrant winning the game. Massive fan of Diego Carlos at centre back for Sevilla. I think he's come in since the start of the season and done exceptionally well. I think he's probably going to be the next centre back that the bigger clubs in Europe are going to be looking at. Likewise with Jules Koundé. He had a very good performance. He's been massive since the start of the season as well. So Sevilla, they've got a really good mixture of having kind of a good experienced players. So the likes of Jesus Navas and Ever Benego, which is leaving at the end of the season. Those are two players who have been in La Liga for many years now and are still producing quality performance week in, week out. Mixed in with the young players like Diego Carlos, like Jules Koundé, like Lucas Ocampos as well. This Sevilla side is really exciting. And I think, they had a bit of a rough patch at the start of the year, start of the calendar year, and it looked like that they were going to drop out of the top four, and people were starting to question Lopetegui. Does he have the credentials to get this side into Champions League football? And fair play to them. They seem to, since the restart, to just fix all the issues that they have had. And now they're in a position where it's looking very likely they're going to challenge for top four, not least because Getafe and Real Sociedad have started to drop points. But, they're in a pretty good position. And credit to Lopetegui. I'm really excited to see what the Sevilla side can achieve in later seasons, because they've got a really good thing going. As for Barca, they've let Real Madrid back into the title race. Neither of them have really been able to pull away at any point in the season. I think it's going to be one that goes really to the wire. Madrid probably in slightly better form right now. Barca don't have the same squad depth that Madrid have in their side. I was looking at the Madrid squad, the 23-man squad they're taking, and their next game is ridiculous. It's got so much quality in it. Barca don't have that same level. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out. I could not tell you for the life of me who's going to win that title race. I'm really excited to see the conclusion of it.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit of a caveat for listeners who probably don't tune into the Liga. If in the case of the two teams finishing tied on points, it will be then decided on their head-to-head and not on goal difference as per the Premier League. So in terms of head-to-head, it would be Real Madrid who would come out on top, which is an interesting permutation. That means Barcelona have to stay ahead, one step ahead of their title rivals. Joe Spagnoli, I assume you've watched a fair bit of La Liga since it's returned this week. We talked about the top there. And I know obviously you guys take a lot of interest in the bottom of the table as well. What was the biggest standout from this week in terms of the abundance of games that were played?
Honestly, I haven't been able to watch as much of La Liga as I would have otherwise liked to. I think the one that surprised me the most was the one from 2 days ago, and that was how comprehensively Real Madrid were able to beat Valencia. Luke has just said about the improved form of Real Madrid, how at the moment they look stronger than Barcelona. At home against Valencia, granted, Valencia had a man sent off in the game, but a 3-0 victory versus a goalless draw against Sevilla, admittedly away from home, it kind of shows the difference in very admittedly short-term form between these two teams. Like Luke says, I don't see this title going any other way than down to the absolute wire. Both have been absolutely excellent, two of the best teams in Europe. However, they do also have weaknesses, perhaps for the first time in a few years, they really can be pressured by the vastly improved teams challenging for the Champions League, like Sevilla, like Valencia, like Sociedad. So really, there's a potential for both teams to drop an awful lot of points before the end of the season. Looking at the game so far, as I just said, Real Madrid versus Valencia was probably the best one. It's nice to see Karim Benzema getting back into it, one of the best strikers in Europe this season. Definitely Real Madrid's star man after Ronaldo's left. Marco Asensio getting a goal as well. Again, players coming back into the fray for Real Madrid that have been something more on the fringes in the last 12 to 18 months. Compare that to Barcelona, who, as Luke and I have mentioned several times before, have absolutely hemorrhaged any squad depth they had. So, I feel like this could, if Real Madrid do end up winning, it will be due more to the abundance of their players rather than the objective quality of individual personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got some stats about some various stats from Opta about how this week went in terms of the league. I'm just going to do a quick score update for the Bundesliga. Joshua Kimmich has put Bayern Munich in front at home to Freiburg. Interesting, Bayern Munich are playing Sarpreet Singh, the young New Zealand midfielder. He gets a start as well, and we will move to the Bundesliga after we finish our La Liga discussion. But yes, just quick score update. Bayern lead 1-0 at Freiburg. Augsburg have taken the lead at Düsseldorf. And Patrick Herrmann has put Mönchengladbach ahead away at Paderborn, and Wout Weghorst has put Wolfsburg also in front at Schalke. And finally, Bebu has put Union Berlin 1-0 up. There's also a lot of action in the Championship. Brentford beat Fulham 2-0, and we will talk about the Championship later. But Swansea also beats Middlesbrough 3-0, and there's one more game going on at the moment. But again, we'll move to the Championship in a sec. But a few stats. I mean, Barcelona, the game last night, them failing to score against Sevilla was the first time in 16 games that they've played with Messi on the pitch that they've ever failed to score at Sevilla, which is an interesting one. And then going back, obviously, the Leganes game, obviously, Ansu Fati came back to our screens and had a big impact. He's become the second youngest player to score 5 goals in the Liga in the 21st century after, do you guys want to guess who might have done it at a younger age? Only
5 goals.
How old is Fati? Like, is he 17 yet?
17, I think.
17 years, 229 days.
Messi.
No, it is someone from Barcelona though. It is another teen prodigy.
Boyan.
Yes, there we go. Luke Edwards gets it. Yes, Boyan remains the youngest to have scored 5 goals in La Liga from the 21st century. But yeah, Barcelona, obviously, that was probably their biggest game at Sevilla, and avoiding defeat could be seen as a pretty good thing. They have to play at Atletico as well, I think, at some point in the next few weeks. So that should be an interesting game. As we said, Real Madrid, Marco Asensio coming back. I mean, that was just, that was a really unlucky injury he picked up all those months ago, and the fact that he's been able to come back, and you could tell what it meant to him when he scored, the joy in his face. And Joe, I know seemingly is, you've seen a bit of that Real Madrid Valencia game. That Benzema, the second goal was unbelievable, wasn't it?
It's what you expect from Karim Benzema these days. He's got not just an eye for consistent goals, but an eye for spectacular goals as well. As I just said, probably the star man for Real Madrid, despite some of the vastly improved players in the team. Think about Federico Valverde's had a great season. Vinicius is developing out on the wing. People thought Eden Hazard would come in and be the best player in the team. Absolutely has not happened. It's Karim Benzema. That team is going to be in serious trouble when he either becomes not good enough anymore or decides to leave for another club, which I don't think he will personally. But when this Benzema era is over, Real Madrid have an awful lot of looking to do, because quite frankly, no striker at Real Madrid has performed anywhere near as well as him. What's happening, Luke?
Luke Edwards.
I've just seen an incredibly funny own goal. Espanyol are now 3-1 down. That is the epitome of their entire season. Goal has been scored by Adria Pedrosa, who's their backup left back. They took off Didac Villa, and the ball just comes in on the left hand side from Levante. It's a fairly easy. It's brilliant. Does anyone remember the Virginie own goal for Sunderland a few seasons ago? It's just anyone remember that at all?
I'm
going mental.
Off the top of my head.
Just Google Virginie own goal and watch that video. The ball comes in. It's a fairly tame cross. And Pedrosa, he's just stood there in the box. All he has to do is he even has time to take it under control and clear, or even go for it with his right foot. For some reason, he goes with it for his left foot, and then sort of clips it perfectly into the top corner past his goalkeeper. It's absolutely bizarre. I have no idea what he's doing. I don't know why he doesn't go for it with his right foot. And all he's done is he's just A, worsened Espanyol's goal differential, and B, just ended any chance of them getting anything from this match. It's just completely idiotic. He's now just run the ball out of play completely unnecessarily. Why Abelardo's brought him on? He's clearly not in the right state of mind. They maybe brought him on to replace Didac Villa, but I have absolutely no idea what he's doing in that situation. Definitely one to look at after, if you ever want to go onto YouTube and watch highlights of this game. Hilarious own goal.
My goodness, it's almost as if you're calling for him to take a taxi and go home. Essentially,
that's what I would. If I was any of the Espanyol players, I'd be starting a fight in the changing rooms at full time.
Oh goodness. Actually, I'll keep the ticker on. We will come to the relegation battle in a sec, but I just a quick mention about Atletico Madrid. If people who know, I do some writing outside of the RAW Sport space, and I wrote an article about how Atletico Madrid, how time is running out for them to secure their top 4 qualification, and lo and behold, they go and beat Osasuna 5-0, which was typical writer's curse. It was interesting because when I was doing a little bit of research for that piece, I saw that Lucas Perez has scored the same amount of goals as Costa and Morata combined in the league, which was quite a damning stat for sure. But then Morata scored on was it Wednesday, I think. So now he's definitely overcome that. But I think I guess the big thing about Atletico is the major takeaway is is there any reason to think that Jan Oblak isn't the best goalkeeper in the world? I'm just putting out there.
He 100% is. He's the best goalkeeper in world football. In
It's
terms of
not even close.
out and out goalkeeping as a pure goalkeeping entity in terms of sitting in front of the goal and saving shots, he is far and away the best in the world. If we're talking, maybe like complete package with the ball at their feet, maybe you could include Manuel Neuer in the conversation, maybe Alisson Becker. But in terms of pure goalkeeping, Jan Oblak is far and away the best. He's absolutely superb. And I mean, part of what helps him is the fact that he's got such a solid defence in front of him. Atleti very happy to have Jose Maria Jimenez back in their side after a fairly long absence, as well as the likes of Felipe, the backup centre-back, did in his place. They're really set up with the return of Costa as well, who has been injured for a lot of the season. Having these players back in their side sets them up really well going into the business end of the year.
Yeah, and I'll just read a quick stat about Oblak. He has become the keeper with the fewest games needed to reach 100 clean sheets in La Liga history. He surpasses Miguel Reyna's record, which he did so in 222 games, which is quite the achievement, really. The fact that he's done it in such he's beaten the record by 40 games, which is that's a season essentially. So that's really remarkable stuff. And the other thing, I guess, is that when I wrote that piece, I was like, where's that goal scoring threat where's that goal scoring threat going to come? And João Felix obviously scored twice, and he's had a injury hit season. It's not really gone as well as planned. Is there something going on, Luke? I don't know.
No, I just watched Mateusz Cunha's goal for Hertha Berlin against Bayer Leverkusen. Very nice goal. I mean, I've said at the start of the game, like, he's really come in and been a revelation for this Hertha Berlin side. Absolutely wonderful footballer, and he's just picked the ball up on the edge of the area, and it's a very weird shot because he leans back and you're half expecting him to just blast over the bar, but it kind of rises perfectly at the right angle and just storms into the top corner. Absolutely no chance for Hradecki in the goal for Bayer Leverkusen. I think that's how you pronounce his name anyway. Hradecki, yeah, he's Finnish. I think he's Finnish, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, nah. But yeah, Mateusz Cunha, I called him at the start of the game for being an incredible footballer, and he goes and scores an absolute stonking goal. I love watching Hertha Berlin. Fantastic goal. 1-0 to Hertha.
There we go, and that's good. It's good timing, really. I can do a little bit of a quick update. Bayern Munich have doubled their lead at home to Freiburg. Robert Lewandowski, of course, has found a way to get onto the score sheet again. And then in the Düsseldorf-Augsburg game, which is an interesting one for the bottom, but Rowan Hennings has equalized to make that a 1-1 game at the moment. Mainz take a big lead at home to Werder Bremen. Robin Quaison has scored there. And then those are the major goals that have gone in the Bundesliga since we last gave a little update. But I guess I was saying, João Felix, how important is his return? And maybe I'll kick it to Joe here. How important is his return for the remainder of their season as they try to emerge from the peloton at the moment that includes Sevilla, Sociedad, Getafe? There's a fair number of teams they're stuck with, and could his return be the difference maker in them getting out of that situation?
I mean, we've been saying all year that Atletico Madrid's biggest problem is goal scoring, and the great irony is, of course, that João Felix scores twice in this game and isn't a striker by any means, or at least that's not how Simeone's tended to use him throughout this season. There are some caveats I'd throw into this game. Atletico only scored once in the first half. Three of the three last goals came in basically the final 15 minutes of play. So it seemed like Osasuna defended pretty well for the most part, but the floodgates just opened towards the end. It will help Atletico in terms of goal difference if that's what's going to decide it towards the end of the season, but really it's more a case of Osasuna collapsing late on when the game went out of their way. It was good that João Felix got to play up front in this game. I just think it's very, very funny that for all the strikers that Atletico Madrid have, the most effective goal scorer is an attacking midfielder /winger that Simeone is effectively being forced to play up front in games like this because all of their other strikers, Correa, Costa, and especially Alvaro Morata, just can't seem to hit the broadside of a barn this season. So, I mean, this game is going to be huge. It certainly asserts Atletico Madrid as one of the top powers pushing for top 4 in Spanish football. Even so, they've still got an awful lot of work to do. I like what I've seen from them coming out of lockdown, but right now they're still a defensively focused team, despite all the changes they've had. As for Jan Oblak, he's the best goalkeeper in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. I think it's a comfortable margin between him and Alisson Becker.
What are the chances you think that Timo Werner is going to end up at Atletico Madrid in the next few years? If the chances
actually, just to interrupt, Dortmund have really asserted their personality on the game. I was wondering why they'd started this guy rather than using him as a super sub. Erling Braut Haaland scored on the 30th minute to put Dortmund 1-0 up away at RB Leipzig. So really, this is what they needed, a goal in the first half hour. I said it. Granted, it took the whole of the first half hour, but Leipzig have actually defended very well. Been very impressed by Nordi Michele out on the right side of that defence. Upamecano's had a good game as well. Sheik got booked. I didn't quite see why. Leipzig on the whole playing well, but Dortmund with a crucial lead in the first half. Now the focus is using that very strong defensive personnel that the Hornets have to hold on to this lead. I believe they are the better team. They've been playing better so far in this game. Leipzig have a lot of quality. They need to hold on to this win if they want to finish second in the Bundesliga. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's going to come down. It's going to come down to who can defend it better. I when doing some research, the reverse fixture it was 3-3 in December, I believe, where I think it was Leipzig who came back to rescue that draw. So should be. I'm hoping for your sake, Joe, it's going to be a high scoring thriller. I know 3 of their last 5 games have yielded more than 5 or more goals. So
I'll be honest with you, Josh. I much prefer games with good defending and lower goals than just stupid goal fest. I've seen an awful lot of those over the last few years on Super Saturday. Really enjoying this one so far. Actually, it's just good to see. It's so obvious why these teams are challenging, for second place in the Bundesliga. Yes, teams like Leverkusen and Gladbach have had great seasons. Been very impressed by the likes of Wolfsburg as well. But these are 2 really, really well-drilled teams overall. And the fact that they've got the likes of Jadon Sancho on the bench willing to come on in the last half hour, and they're not even playing Hakimi this afternoon. This Dortmund team is strong. I don't actually think, I was saying this to Luke the other day when we recorded the podcast, Dortmund don't really need to sign that many players to be one of the best teams in Europe next year. The biggest question mark is over the manager. And if Favre can end the season well, I don't see why. I don't see an obvious replacement and improvement on him. So all systems go at Borussia Dortmund.
Sorry, what was the name of that podcast again? Just for those who don't know much about it.
Luke, I've completely forgotten what it's called.
Yeah, I think it's the Eurozone podcast, Joe.
Yeah, the Eurozone football podcast.
There we go.
Sorry, Piontek's just tried to score from the halfway line and completely messed up. It's just,
he thinks he's Steven Gerrard all of a sudden.
He does.
This is why I think I'm going to stick with the Bundesliga next season, just for all the craziness that goes on.
Not crazy league. Watch the Polish Ekstraklasa.
Yeah, and I'll tease this. We will. I mean, the Russian league is pretty crazy itself, and we'll come to that at the very end probably. Okay, so turning our attention away. First of all, I'll get a prediction. Do you think the top 4 will stay as they are
in the Bundesliga?
In La Liga, sorry.
Barca,
okay. Madrid, Real Madrid, Sevilla, Atletico. Do we think it's going to stay as it is?
What, in the exact same order, or the teams that are in it? Because I think the order will change.
You can go for it. You can elaborate where you think it's going to change.
I personally can see Real Madrid overhauling Barcelona for the title.
Okay.
I think Sevilla will hold on to 3rd place. As for 4th, I do think Atletico will hold on. I haven't been as impressed with Getafe or Sociedad since the break, but again, I don't think it's going to be, they run away with 4th place. They're going to have to fight for it because, the teams 5th through to about 10th in La Liga have been so damn good this year. Even the likes of Granada and Bilbao that, there's pressure from every direction, and all these teams play so differently as well that Atletico are going to need to be at their best week in, week out. They're probably going to need to play even better than they did against Osasuna, who themselves have been pretty good this season against a lot of the teams they've got coming up on the running order. 4th place, though.
Luke, I'll give you the same question. Do you think it's going to change? The top 4 is going to change as it currently stands, and where do you think it's going to change if you do think it is?
See, I'd go the opposite to Joe. I reckon if anything's going to happen, I think Atletico could go for third place. The top front two, I really can't call it between Barca and Real at the moment. I think they both have a lot of weaknesses, but also are far and away the best two sides in the league, so it could go either way. I would say I would expect Atletico Madrid to have a bit of resurgence at this part of the season. Simeone's got a lot of his players who were previously injured back in the squad. If they can keep them all fit, then they'll be in a very good position that way. I also like some of the tactical adjustments that Simeone's made over the COVID break. For example, introducing Marcos Llorente as a kind of Raul Garcia style second striker. He came on against Osasuna and they scored 3 of the goals directly after he came on, with Llorente getting one of those goals. So maybe that's a role that will really affect Atleti going into the run-in. I think he could make a very big difference. So I'd expect them to finish there. And I think, I would say Sevilla probably have just enough to finish in top 4. I don't think they're far and away better than a lot of the sides in this division, but I think Getafe, they did this at the same time last year. They just kind of drop off and because they don't really have the quality of the other sides to be able to grind out results quite like the teams around them. And then Sociedad, not great defensively. I'm a big fan of them creatively, but even then, Odegaard in the past 2 games hasn't really had the same effect that he had prior to the restart. So I'm going to say I would expect those 2 sides to potentially fall off a little bit. And I think the top 4 will largely remain the same, if not the ordering changing around a little bit.
Yeah, I think I obviously, have to stay a little bit impartial here, but I do think the break does benefit Real Madrid a lot, because you think about Real Madrid, they've got a mainly veteran side. There are a few youngsters, obviously, but I think their star players are veterans, and I do think the break does freshen them up, as we saw in the first 2 games back. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one, and we'll look at the bottom of the table. Now, admittedly, and I'm going to admit this, I'm not a huge expert on the bottom of the table, so I'm going to leave it to you. I'm going to just pose the same opening question as I did just then. You see the bottom 3: Mallorca, Espanyol, Leganés. Obviously not far off Eibar and Celta Vigo, but they are currently in the bottom 3. Again, do you feel they are the 3 teams that are going to go down come the end of July? And I'll start with Joe.
We actually handled this exact question on the latest podcast, which will be coming out very soon. But I mean, my answer has sort of changed in light of how poor Espanyol have been this afternoon. The 3 teams that I said would go down were going to be Leganés in 20th, Mallorca in 19th, and I think, if I remember correctly, I had Celta Vigo very narrowly.
You had Eibar there, didn't you?
No, I said Eibar would survive because their run-in was a little bit easier.
It's very easy, yeah.
Yeah, they've got the easiest run-in and they defend very well. Probably the best defensive team of those 5 at the bottom of the league. I think Eibar will survive. The question marks that we were putting were Celta Vigo or Espanyol for that 18th position, because we think it'll ultimately be very close between the 2. This result today that Luke's just watched, that could be the death knell for Espanyol. They need to make the most of every game they've got and make the most of the big signings they made in January as well, because they are a really, really good team. They would not be under threat of relegation in any of the other European top 5 leagues this year, but they need to. But the point is, the same goes for Celta Vigo as well. They need to make the most of every game they're getting. Granted, Celta haven't been in the best run of form, but it's going to be between those 2. Right now, I'm still going to say Espanyol to survive, but the chances are going down just a little bit.
Yeah, Luke. I mean, I don't want to obviously give away your guys' podcast content, but do you loosely agree with Joe there? Is that this kind of similar stance you've got?
I think Joe's absolutely spot on. I would say it's a really difficult one because you've got Leganés and Mallorca who are both not very good. They don't have great players. They're not in great form. They don't score enough goals. Those 2 are destined to go down, in my opinion. Then you've got Celta Vigo and Espanyol, who are 2 sides who, realistically, looking at the teams on paper, should be nowhere near the relegation battle in the first place, and yet they just haven't been able to find any sort of cohesion at all this season. Celta are in a different position where they have a kind of clutch player in Iago Aspas, who has been able to get them out of trouble before, and they're also used to relegation battles. Espanyol less so. They don't have. I mean, you talk about Raul de Tomas. He's been injured a lot in his time at Espanyol. Didn't make the squad today through injury, so he's the kind of the shining light. And if he's not around, they don't have in my opinion, the quality to define games as quite as well as they should have done. It's a really difficult one to call. I think Eibar will be fine. Deportivo Alaves and Valladolid, who are kind of thrust into it a little bit, have managed to drag themselves out of it with a couple of wins, so that they should both be fine as teams. If you had to put a gun to my head and say which teams you think are going to go down, I would probably say I think Espanyol will. I can't call it. I'd probably say Espanyol will just go down, but it's going to be between them and Celta Vigo at the minute. I really cannot call it.
Yeah, and I guess a great way to finish up our La Liga discussion is talk about Celta Vigo. News broke this week. They have an injured goalkeeper. Sergio Alvarez is his name, and similar to the Martin Braithwaite situation, Celta Vigo were given permission to sign an extra player, an emergency signing. I don't know how, considering no one's heard of this loophole for years, and now it's come up twice. I'm assuming the Spanish authorities are going to have to change it, but
they need to.
It needs to go. It's such a stupid rule.
So for those who don't know, they then went on to sign a striker, Nolito, who previously played for Manchester City, I believe, from Sevilla, and they've essentially swapped a goalkeeper, a third choice goalkeeper, for a starting caliber striker, or at least a top bench player striker. So, wow! First of all, that's amazing that this ruling is still in place. And second, and I'll toss it. I mean, whoever wants to take this question, but this is a game changer, surely, for their hopes of surviving the drop.
Yeah, Luke completely can take this. Yeah, Luke can take this a lot better than I can. But I just the thing that gets me is that it's clearly, it doesn't solve the problem at all. I know the Premier League has like an emergency goalkeeping rule, which, I mean, I can't remember the last time it was actually used. It might have been Jens Lehmann way back in the day, but I just find it so ridiculous that Celta can lose what is effectively a reserve goalkeeper. They've got two goalkeepers that are ahead of him this year, Checo Alvarez, and they're allowed to bring in someone who A, plays for another team in the same division, B, is a player that's played for them before and thus knows the system and the team very, very well in Nolito, and 3, a striker. Celta Vigo's biggest problem all season has been striking. So Celta Vigo have basically lost almost nothing in Checo Alvarez, and yet they've been able to directly answer the striking problems that they were unable to answer in the transfer windows. But Luke can go into more detail about just how messed up this rule is.
No, you kind of summarised it well, Joe. No, go on, Josh.
I'll quickly just say, Luke, that the first sentence of the statement that the club made was the new reinforcement for the final section of the season could not arouse greater joy, which, I mean, if you'd told any club, if you told someone like West Ham, and I'm just throwing a name out there, obviously there's a ton of clubs that could need a striker at this current situation, but of course, yeah, it's such a, yeah, it's almost like Christmas has come early for them. Yeah, and yeah, Luke, please go forth and keep.
It would be like, yeah, my son's a really good example of this actually, because they're a club that seems to get kind of lucky with their signings, keeping them up even though they're a little bit dodgy. Cough, Carlos Tevez, cough. Yeah, what's funny about this one is Celta Vigo, as Joe alluded to, they have the worst goal scoring record in the division. Iago Aspas has been responsible in terms of goals and assists for half of their goals this season. They don't have any real quality going forward. Defensively, they're pretty sound. Ruben Blanco, the goalkeeper, is pretty good. The centre-back partnership in Murillo and Araujo are perfectly solid. Their problem has purely been scoring goals. They brought in Santi Mina after losing Maxi Gomez in the summer. He hasn't really solved the issue whatsoever. And it's absolutely hilarious. What makes this even worse, though, is from a Leganés perspective, they've been messed up by this rule already, losing their star striker, Martin Braithwaite, to Barcelona in February when they weren't able to bring in a replacement. Left them stranded without a goal scorer in the relegation zone. They haven't been able to recover it since because, hey, you can't score goals if you haven't got a striker, and they had an opportunity to replace him. And now that's been compounded by their relegation rivals being able to bring in an experienced La Liga striker at the business end of the season. This is something that needs completely revisiting. I think the RFEF should just scrap it altogether because, let's face it, it's a team's responsibility to ensure that they have enough depth in their squad during the transfer windows so that if they do pick up a freak injury, they're not left stranded. These teams have not made these concessions. Celta Vigo I didn't mind it so much with Barcelona because they did actually pick up an injury to Ousmane Dembele. Even then, I thought it was dodgy, but I could excuse it a little bit. With this, it's just outright manipulating the system. You cannot replace your backup goalkeeper with a starting striker in the middle of a relegation battle that will determine the financial futures of all of these clubs. It's completely messed up. The RFEF need to look at it, and Leganes should be absolutely fuming and look to take this to court.
Yeah, and you make a good point there. I can imagine I know for obviously the leagues have stopped below the championship in England, but if you had told a League Two team you could do that, then they would obviously bite your hand off and absolutely do it. So yeah, it's an interesting loophole in the Spanish Federation rule book, and we will definitely watch with keen interest if that gets amended over the summer or so before next season. We will transition to the Bundesliga. It's probably about the right time or so to do a bit of a halftime score update. But so I'll come to you. You two have been obviously watching a few Bundesliga games at the moment. Joe, since the Erling Haaland goal, has there been much to know? Have Leipzig kind of fought back in a way, or has it been Dortmund taking control of the game?
It looks like a bit of game management from Lucien Favre at Dortmund. The energy seemed to drop off just a little bit, controlling stamina, pay, the amount that Borussia Dortmund players run in that 3-4-3. It's perfectly understandable why they would do so. It's still 1-0 going into the break. The visitors Dortmund 1-0 up over RB Leipzig. An interesting change, though, was made with a few minutes to go in the first half. I didn't actually see this, I don't know if it's an injury, but Marcel Sabitzer has come off for RB Leipzig in favour of the youngster Dani Olmo, who has been excellent since he's came in. So that's a pretty damn offensive change. Olmo is far more a progressive midfielder. Sabitzer's something more of a centre mid that can often play on the side of the midfield partnership. So that's going to change the dynamic of how they play quite a lot. You can see maybe they've already moved. Maybe it was just an error in Google formations. They're actually playing three at the back as well, with wing backs Angelino and Mukiele. So the team's going to change its shape quite a lot in the second half. I don't think it's disaster stations for Dortmund in not being able to get a second goal. Leipzig getting back into it at the end of the first half, a couple of shots on goal. I don't think this game's going to be, out of reach for either side until realistically the last 20 minutes. What Dortmund need to do is start the second half and just use what stamina they've got left, because, they were running a hell of a lot less than Leipzig in the last 10 minutes of that half, and use that to assert some control over the game. They've got God knows how many substitutes to use. If they could get another goal before Jadon Sancho comes on, I think they've got this game pretty much wrapped up. But again, that will be towards the end of this afternoon. But a good performance so far from both teams. Dortmund deserve to be ahead, but a good performance from both.
Luke Edwards, you've been well. Am I right in thinking is Espanyol Levante still going, or is that?
That ended a while ago. It ended 3-1.
Well, so do you want to give a bit of an update on that game as well as the Hertha Leverkusen game, if that's all right?
Yeah. So with regards to the Levante versus Espanyol, not the result that Espanyol were looking for. They were looking to at least get a draw out of this one. They are firmly in the relegation battle, currently second from bottom. They needed a win from this match realistically, because Levante have had a very good season, particularly by their standards. They are not the biggest club in La Liga, and yet they've managed to overperform this year. Sitting around mid-table very comfortably. But they were very much a side that were there for the taking. I think Abelardo, the Espanyol manager, would have recognised that before the game, and it's resulted in them not being able to take advantage of a very good opportunity for them. And it just means that it's going to put pressure on them to get results in games they might not necessarily ordinarily be expected to get results in. I think they've got a fair few games against the top four coming up. So they're not in a good position at all. They needed a result from this match. They didn't get it. And it was kind of compounded by an absolutely comical own goal at the end. Espanyol not in a good shape, where for me personally, this actually puts a massive dent in their survival hopes. I expected them to at least get a draw from this match beforehand. They haven't managed it. they're in trouble. On a lighter note, going over to Hertha Berlin versus Bayer Leverkusen. Bayer Leverkusen looking to challenge for top 4. I can't remember where they are right now. Some of you might be able to enlighten me.
Leverkusen.
Leverkusen, yeah. They're in 4th. I couldn't remember if Mönchengladbach had surpassed them, but no. Leverkusen sat in 4th at the minute. They're coming up against a side in Hertha Berlin who are in very good form. They've actually performed exceptionally well since the restart, certainly from the many games that I've watched from them. Hertha Berlin are in a position where they are going to be looking to challenge for top 4/top 6 next season. Labadia, ever since the restart, since he came in April, has put the team together really well. They've made some exceptional signings. Mateusz Cunha, the epitome of that, coming in and scoring a barnstorming goal from the edge of the area to send them 1-0 up. This game's an interesting one because it's not only an implication of for Bayer Leverkusen's season this season, but could also affect how we perceive Hertha Berlin going into next year. If they're able to have a good resurgence under Labadia with the quality of the players they have, there's no reason why they can't be challenging for those positions next year. And it's these games that are going to be really indicative of that. The fact is they've been able to more than hold their own in this match. Bayer Leverkusen have probably had more of the possession. They seem to have controlled the ball, certainly since Hertha scored. Hertha seem happy to sit back off. They're kind of deploying a 4-4-2, 2 banks of 4, not really letting much get through. Mostly shots from distance that Bayer Leverkusen being restricted to. Second half is going to be big, not only, as I say, in terms of the future of the top 4 race and allowing Borussia Mönchengladbach back in, but also in terms of how we perceive these sides next season and the general feeling of an atmosphere around Hertha Berlin at the moment.
Yeah, and we'll get onto the Bundesliga in a sec. I'll do a quick halftime score update. So I'll just give you guys a bit of a breather. So, I say halftime. Brighton Arsenal has kicked off. It's been 20 minutes and it's goalless. So that game is goalless. Watford Leicester was played earlier today. That is 1-1. So that's the Premier League. In La Liga, as we said, as Luke Edwards has told us, Levante took a 3-1 victory away at Espanyol. There are 4 more games to go later today. Athletic Club take on Real Betis, Getafe host Eibar, and Atletico Madrid will host Valladolid. Serie A, we will again talk about that later. There are 2 games coming up tonight in their kind of opener. Torino hosting Parma and Hellas Verona will host Cagliari, but again, we will get to that later. In the Bundesliga, Bayern Munich a 3-1 up at halftime at home to Freiburg. Kimmich and Lewandowski with the 2 goals for the now champions, and Huller with the response for Freiburg. Cologne lead 1-0 at home to Eintracht Frankfurt. Florian Kainz scored a penalty after Mark Uth has missed so many penalties over the last few weeks. I guess they swapped penalty taking duties, and Kainz has scored for Cologne. Fortuna Düsseldorf, they are being held 1-1 against FC Augsburg with Niederlechner, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and Rowan Hennings scoring for either club for the respective teams. So there we go. It is 1-1 there. Mainz lead 2-0 at home to Werder Bremen. Robin Quaison and Bertius have scored in what could be a big result for them to climb away from the relegation battle. As Joe Spanioli told us, Erling Haaland has scored to put Dortmund 1-0 up away at RB Leipzig, and the same scoreline is there at Paderborn versus Mönchengladbach. Patrick Herrmann scored very early on. And then also you got Hertha Berlin took a 1-0 lead at home to Bayer Leverkusen, as Luke Edwards has said. Schalke have been unable to respond to Wout Weghorst's goal, and that means they trail 1-0 at the break to Wolfsburg. And then in the final Bundesliga game, Hoffenheim are 3-0 up at home to Union Berlin. Bebu, Kramaric, and Dabur have all scored in I think it's their second or third game since they got rid of Alfred Schroeder at the helm. In the championship derby, they won 3-2 at Millwall. Louis Sibley with a hat trick, with his third coming in the 90th minute. And despite Connor, I think it's Connor Mahoney's late reply for Millwall, they were unable to grab an equaliser. Fulham lost 2-0 at home to Brentford. Swansea pick up a 3-0 win away at Middlesbrough. Ryan Bruce scored twice, and I believe it was James Pearce, the Athletics writer for Liverpool, saying Timo Who in response to Ryan Brewster's brace. And then we've got a couple of games going on. Blackburn Rovers, Bristol City. That is goalless, so Kylan Stillwood has not got much to celebrate as of now. Huddersfield Town are goalless at home to Wigan. Charlton have taken a 1-0 lead at Hull City. Luton Town are goalless at home to Preston North End. Barnsley are 1-0 up at QPR. And Reading are 1-0 up at home to Stoke. Sheffield Wednesday versus Nottingham Forest, that is goalless. And West Brom are drawing goalless at home to Birmingham City. And Nottingham Forest, that reminds me, if you haven't checked out our interview with Daniel Taylor, the Athletics senior football writer, please do. It was a really fascinating and insightful conversation for half an hour, which myself and Joe Spagnoli had with him. And we talked about a range of things. We talked about obviously the current state of football at the moment, and we talked about the issues that now face the sport, and also advice for journalism and how he went about uncovering the football sexual abuse scandal, which is one of the big kind of investigative pieces that really was an important one that came out and that he worked incredibly hard on. So please check that out. That is on the YouTube channel, and it is, I believe, going to be made available on Spotify as well to listen to as soon as Anchor does all their processes. Yep. Okay. So we will talk a bit about the Bundesliga. We will talk a bit about the Bundesliga. And we will talk a little bit about the Bundesliga at the moment. So it'll be Joe Spagnoli and I just momentarily. You're watching Leipzig Dortmund. That is the I guess the big question mark, at least at the top of the table. But that's only because Bayern Munich won their 8th league title in a row. And it's incredible to think that no team has won more than 3 league titles in a row in Germany. And they've gone on and won 8, which is stupendously amazing. I guess a few words on Bayern Munich and Hansi Flick, what kind of effect do you think his appointment has had on this Bayern team in general?
I mean, I said exactly the same thing to Luke when we were recording the podcast yesterday. What Hansi Flick has done, which is more impressive than the overall tactical changes which have improved Bayern Munich in the second half of the season, what he has done is reverse the seemingly inexorable decline of several key players in that squad. Manuel Neuer was not regarded as one of the best goalkeepers, very best goalkeepers in the world at the beginning of this season. He is now, and rightfully so. He's improved an awful lot under Hansi Flick. I don't personally think he's been this good since before his, the injury that basically destroyed his last World Cup and wiped out about a season of his professional career. He's been excellent. If you look at the defense, Jerome Boateng, who was incredibly poor on so many occasions in the first half of the season, now looks like the top-class centre-back he is and has been for such a long time. When you can just repeat this process time and time again for several players, key players often in the Bayern Munich system. But you've also got to remember that Bayern Munich in the second half of the season are always amazing. They tend to start slowly, whereas Leipzig, maybe Dortmund, maybe even Gladbach or Leverkusen, Gladbach in the case of this season, start exceptionally well. Bayern can always drop a few points towards the beginning of the year, but in the second half, they just steamroll it. And with the improvements under Hansi Flick, the best striker in Europe in Robert Lewandowski, they've looked absolutely incredible in the second half of this season. Personally, I've said this to Luke as well, when the Champions League returns, I think they're favourites. I don't see another team that's even close to them, really. Barcelona and Real Madrid have issues. PSG would have been a challenge. I honestly do believe that. However, with the League One season cancelled, the fitness just won't be there when the Champions League resumes. Juventus have got too many problems in midfield. Man City, don't even go there. They can't defend to save their lives. Bayern Munich have been exceptional this season. And the truth is, yes, they've won 8 league seasons in a row, but it's not like they haven't been challenged. They have overcome great teams every single season to get there. And the fact that they've continued to perform at this level is just exceptional. You know what? It's easy to hate Bayern Munich for how successful they are, but you've also got to remember that they do it by virtue of being Bayern Munich. They don't have, sponsorship coming in from the Middle East. They're not funded by oil money. It's one of the truest German clubs you can find. The fact that they've been able to succeed within that model is honestly just a testament to them. Worthy Bundesliga champions. And Robert Lewandowski has been the best striker in Europe again this year. No more to say.
Yeah, and we'll get on to, in the Premier League section, we'll talk a bit about Leroy Sané's future and where he could, and a potential return to Germany rather, not return to Bayern Munich, return to Germany that he could be making. We'll bring back Luke Edwards. Yeah, Bayern have been absolutely dominant. I don't know if there's a lot to say. And do you think, maybe I'll talk to Luke here about this. They've obviously had a lot of players that have done the job a lot. I think it's like Alaba and Muller's like 9 for 8 league title. They've obviously had players who've been around for a while. Do you think the next step is to then evolve that team to bring in some of these youngsters, like a Sarpreet Singh who's starting today, like I'm gonna butcher his name, but Michael Cuisance? Do you think that's the next step for this all-conquering Bayern team, to kind of evolve it to ensure that this dominance is going to be? I mean, obviously financially they have the might to sustain this, but on the pitch rather, do you think they will then look to sustain it by bringing through these young players?
Yeah, and I think we've seen that a lot this year, particularly with Alphonso Davies coming through. They've moved Alaba to centre back, which I think has worked wonders in a way. I think his career was stagnating a little bit, but he's moved centre back and performed really well and kind of developed his play. But bringing through Alphonso Davies as a kind of marauding left back has been a real stroke of genius, and he could be the kind of player that even develops into a left winger later on in his career. The biggest challenge I think Bayern Munich face in the next coming years is probably replacing Robert Lewandowski. He is a striker who is reliant on not so much on physicality and pace. He is more of a positional striker, which will serve him well. He could realistically play at the top level until he's sort of 33, 34 years old. But by then you would expect for his performances to have dropped off even a little bit. And they're going to have to try and find someone to come in and take the pressure of goal scoring off him a little bit. They have had that with Thomas Müller to an extent this year, and I believe he's created like 20. I think he's done 20 assists this season or something ridiculous like that. He's another player they're going to phase out, but I think they have more ready replacements for him in the likes of Thiago Alcantara, in the likes of Joshua Kimmich. They have players who can take the creative burden off Thomas Müller. But the main question will be Robert Lewandowski. Can he maintain this level of performance in future seasons? And then there's also the question of Bayern Munich. Can they find an adequate replacement for him? You would have looked at Timo Werner actually and gone, he could have been a potential player for them to go and look and sign as a German player, as a proven Bundesliga player, and a player who's done well in the Champions League as well. He could have come in and performed at the top level immediately and taken that pressure off Lewandowski. So they might need to look at elsewhere for other players. I don't know quite who they could look at. They could just go and raid Borussia Dortmund for Erling Braut Haaland again. He could be a very viable option for them, but kind of a similar goal-scoring capability to Robert Lewandowski. Maybe a little bit more physical, but still a wonderful striker in his own right. Otherwise, I can't really think of many players they could go for. Maybe it's someone in the youth system they could look at bringing through. But what I will say with Bayern is that they're not in a position where they need to be panicking. They've got a young enough squad with some really good young talents in there. There's just a couple of question marks that they have over their long-term future. But talking over the next couple of years, I don't see anyone getting close to them in the Bundesliga. We've seen Dortmund try this year, but the reality is maybe it's a managerial issue, but the reality is they don't have the quality that Bayern Munich do. So they're not necessarily going to be in a position to go and win the league.
Yeah, and you mentioned question marks. I mean, Dortmund certainly have a few. Joe's watching them play against Leipzig. They lost at home to Mainz on Wednesday night, and in fact, Mainz are the only team to have been Dortmund at home twice since the start of 2018, which is quite remarkable. That must make them their bogey team. They're Crystal Palace if they were Liverpool, for instance. But yeah, a lot of talk about Lucien Favre and whether he is the man to continue this Dortmund experiment. I've seen Jesse Marsch's name linked as someone who could potentially come in and take this team further, and I'm sure they'll be considering their moves. And Joe, I know it's putting you a bit on the spot because you're watching them at the moment. But is the only way a managerial change for Dortmund? Is that because obviously we believe they're going to? We don't know how long Jadon Sancho is going to stay at the club, but we believe at some point he's going to want out. And what do you think the next step is for them going forward?
If anything has to change at Borussia Dortmund, it is the manager. But I don't feel like the tightrope is enough to justify Lucien Favre going at the moment. There have been several occasions throughout the season where he's been questioned. I don't think he's under serious pressure of losing his job, especially if he can pull off a win to come back to my game this afternoon, which the second half has just started for against RB Leipzig. I was saying this again to Luke, again on the Eurozone Football podcast, but it's partly due to COVID-19's financial implications, is that there's a chance that we won't see as many big money signings this summer as we otherwise would have done. So holding on to Jadon Sancho, at least for this summer, might be more viable. Holding on to Erling Braut Haaland, who's probably going to have his release clause renegotiated, is going to be easier than it otherwise would be. Remember that Borussia Dortmund signed one hell of a lot of players throughout this year. Think about Emre Can coming in January. I imagine he'll probably come in permanently from Juventus. Torgan Hazard, Julian Brandt. The likelihood, I don't know if it's the likelihood, I should say, but they should try and bring back Achraf Hakimi for another year from Real Madrid. If they can the emphasis is holding this team together. If they can hold it together, I don't see why they can't cut the gap to Bayern Munich with a little bit more experience, a little bit more cohesion between all of these new players. Whether or not they overhaul them, I think it's unlikely with how well Bayern Munich play, but I wouldn't sack Favre just for the sake of it. Yes, he hasn't done quite as well as he perhaps could have done, but you could say the same about Julian Nagelsmann at RB Leipzig. You could say exactly the same about Peter Bosch at Bayer Leverkusen. They've all dropped points at some point throughout this season. Bayern Munich haven't done that so much because they're Bayern Munich.
Yeah, it's a valid argument, and we will again watch with keen interest what they do. I imagine them being Germans, it'll be a measured response and a well thought out one, because the German clubs don't tend, well, unless you're Hertha Berlin, they don't tend to make rash decisions. But yeah, as we said, Leipzig are third and obviously going to lose Timo Werner, so that would be interesting to see what they do next season in terms of, do they push Patrick Schick into the more of the star player role? Is that his next step?
If they sign him?
Yeah, that's true. Again, I believe they're negotiating the move at the moment, but I believe Roma's asking price is a bit higher than what they want. We're not going to go too deep dive into the Bundesliga because you've heard us cover it for the last few weeks, so there's no need for us to keep going into it as much. But we'll look at the bottom. I'll just ask the last question, I guess, on the bottom of the table. But we know Arminia Bielefeld are coming back. They've secured promotion, and we know that the bottom it's still pretty tight. It's still pretty difficult to say who's going down. Obviously, Paderborn, I think it's safe to assume they're going down. But certainly 14th to 17th, there's definitely a chance things might move around. So I know it might be putting you guys on the spot because you're obviously not watching them now, but Werder Bremen, who have a significantly higher wage bill than some of these other teams, are they the ones that are probably going to go down, Joe?
They're currently 2-0 down against Mainz, who have actually been very impressive in the last few weeks, not least beating Borussia Dortmund away from home. So I wouldn't read too much into the result this afternoon, but if Werder Bremen go down, they're in serious trouble. That's almost as big a relegation as Hamburg from a few years ago. A lot of players will want to leave. Wages will need to be drastically altered, especially in COVID-19 affected conditions in the Zweite Bundesliga. I personally think, I've seen Werder Bremen a few times since lockdown conditions were eased, and they just look too damn good to go down. And I still think that Fortuna Düsseldorf on balance, could fall into that 17th position. Whichever one of these two teams ends up in 16th in the relegation playoff, I don't think they'll go down. I don't see someone in the second division that's good enough in those positions to take that position from them. But I personally think Werder Bremen will overhaul Fortuna Düsseldorf for that 16th place and survive on the relegation playoff. Fair play to Düsseldorf. They've actually been pretty damn good for the 2 years they've been in the Bundesliga, but there are just too many good teams in this division and ultimately not enough places for them. So Paderborn 18th, Fortuna Düsseldorf 17th, but it'll be close.
Yeah, absolutely, and that'll definitely go down to the wire. And I think Düsseldorf, if they can beat Augsburg, today, then that's a massive win for them. But we wait and see, because that is 1-1 at the moment. We'll probably jump to the Premier League next. I'm just going to bring a bit of an update here. Bernd Leno has apparently gone down quite badly. He's kind of slid awkwardly. He's taking on oxygen, as the BBC Live text is saying. There's a stretcher coming out for him, so that him being sidelined is definitely a big blow for Arsenal. And I guess we can start with talking about Wednesday night. I guess is the first place to start the Premier League coming back. And Joe, I know you have a lot of thoughts about Arsenal. I'll read some stats before you do. Man City, Arsenal. Where are they? There they are. So. And they're full disclosure, they're all kind of centered around David Luiz. But the first one being that Arsenal failed to get in a single shot on target against City, which is the first time that they had done that since 2017. David Luiz, he's conceded penalties at Liverpool, Chelsea, City this season, and he's been sent off at Stamford Bridge and the Etihad. And he's the first player to be sent off, concede a penalty, and commit an error leading to an opposition goal in the Premier League since Carl Jenkinson in 2015. And after coming on and if you take that feat and add on the fact that he came on as a substitute, is the first player to do that in Europe's top 5 leagues since Ivan Karoba for Inter in 2011. Obviously, they are playing Brighton now, and indeed Emiliano Martinez has come on for Leno, so that's a big change there. They also lost Pablo Mari and Xhaka on Wednesday night. And yeah, I mean, this is, I don't want to say, and I put this, I mean, I'm going to give you just the floor, Joe, to just talk about however you want to go with Arsenal. I'm guessing you watched Wednesday night. What did you make of the game, and what did you make of, both teams, but mainly Arsenal?
Yeah. I'm not going to harp on too much about the poor quality of the game, which I believe it was of really poor quality overall. Even Manchester City did not look on it. You could say exactly the same about the game between Norwich and Southampton. Both teams, for me, looked incredibly weak. Ultimately, these teams haven't been playing for months. They haven't been training for as long as they perhaps could have done, safety-wise or not. So I'm not going to, harp on about them being bad, because, we've seen some pretty poor football from a lot of relatively poor football from some sides at home in Germany. The Italian Coppa Italia games we've had this week haven't been great either. Granted, I think they've been a hell of a lot better than what we've seen from the Prem, but that's fine. Arsenal, it's just an absolute parody of errors. It's basically a rotating centre-backs in the game. So Pablo Mari starts, who was himself a bit of a panic buy in January from Flamengo. He ends up getting injured very, very early on, as is not particularly unusual, in conditions like this. Granit Xhaka had gone down as well. David Luiz comes on. David Luiz was an interesting signing when he happened, in the sense that he was actually quite a lot of money considering the poor season he's had at Chelsea. The high wages, which were apparently Arsenal's biggest priority over the summer, cutting their wage bill, which they absolutely failed to do, as well as being the highest net spenders in the Premier League. So the excuse that the board doesn't spend money really doesn't work anymore. Then they bring on Shkodran Mustafi to replace David Luiz after he got sent off, who's been scapegoated for several years by the Arsenal fans. Ultimately, his role as scapegoat has been replaced by David Luiz this year. The great irony being that now Luiz is suspended for 3 games because of a straight red card, which now means he's suspended for longer than his 1-year Arsenal contract actually allows him to play for. So there's a real chance that will be his last game for Arsenal. The issue I have coming out of the game is that it was covered by, this is what really annoys me about Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville specifically, who are 2 of the best pundits in the UK. They're able Jamie Carragher made the point, which is absolutely correct. The only manager in the last 5 years or so to get the most out of David Luiz was Antonio Conte in his first season at Chelsea, when effectively David Luiz was shielded by two competent centre-backs either side of him, and he could drift forward into a CDM and unleash hell from 30 yards. Why can Jamie Carragher then not make the second step and perhaps realise the obvious point that the reason why David Luiz has been so disappointing is because other managers just fail to get the best out of him. Other managers they set up their team in a way that is so contrary to the way that he plays. They allow these errors to be so easily exposed in exactly the same way Arsenal did with Mustafi, and now exactly the same way they've done with David Luiz. David Luiz was not a good signing at the time. And he was making mistakes all the way through last season for Chelsea. Are people honestly surprised that he's doing that for Arsenal now, when Arsenal have got such woeful defensive coaching? These problems have been symptomatic of Arsenal's defence throughout the last years of Arsene Wenger, throughout Unai Emery's reign, and they're already showcasing themselves under Mikel Arteta. Clearly, the manager isn't the problem. It comes down to defensive coaching, as it does for so many of these Premier League teams. And yet it is so much easier for pundits and fans to point at one player who's been disappointing. And David Luiz has been disappointing. Why are they not prepared to take the logical next step and perhaps question the coaching staff who are clearly letting down Arsenal Football Club defensively? There.
Yeah, there we go. That is, there we go. That is
Yeah, game was shocking, by the way. Game was absolutely abysmal as well. Just overall.
I think we should say something about Man City. They did the job. They got the 3 points. Kevin De Bruyne, he looked great as per usual. But I think I think them winning wasn't a huge surprise. But what was a little bit of a surprise was the news on speaking of City, on the news yesterday that Leroy Sané has completely decided he doesn't want to stay at City. I believe he's got 18 months of a deal, so they have to consider getting rid of him. That's an interesting situation. What do you make of it? And I'm just going to quickly read a stat about. I mean, I know obviously we haven't seen a lot of Leroy Sané, granted, in the last year or so. Yeah. I've got a stat about him, if it's going to load or not. If it doesn't, then great. But if not, but actually, let's while it does, we'll just quickly wrap a bow on the Arsenal discussion. They're obviously playing Brighton now. Brighton is a team, and we'll bring Luke Edwards back. Arsenal failed to beat Brighton in 4 of their last 5 games, which is quite a damning stat. And I know it's difficult for you guys to comment on something that you're not watching currently, but where does Arsenal go from? Where does Arsenal go from here? Obviously, it will be a big summer of change. But Luke, is it bringing in more players? Because obviously, with the current finances being affected by the pandemic, they're obviously not going to be able to do that as much. So where does Arsenal kind of go from here?
Honestly, Josh, I have no idea. One thing that Arsenal do have going for them, I think, is a lot in their youth players, particularly looking up at Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli, and Kieran Tierney. Those 3 players have a lot of quality, and are the kind of players that Arsenal need to be developing. They're probably in a situation where they need to sell realistically to get players in. So I would recommend that maybe fetch some money from Mesut Ozil, or at least try and flog him, get his wages off the books, and maybe use that wage money to reinvest in some new players, or reinvest with some contracts for their current lot of players. I know there's some contract issues going on with Bukayo Saka. Otherwise, I don't really know what other players they could go for they would be able to sell that they'd make a good amount of money for. Ozil's the only one they could really flog away in terms of wages. The other players, looking at the likes of Aubameyang, they could probably do with him in the squad. I don't think they could realistically get a striker of his quality. As good as Martinelli is, I don't think he's quite at that level yet. Maybe in a season or 2, they could look at getting rid of Aubameyang, but for now, they need him in the squad. In terms of central midfielders, I think Xhaka's okay. I don't think they could fetch much money for him. He's probably the kind of player they should be just keeping in their squad regardless. it just looks a bit bleak for Arsenal. I don't know who they could bring in for a realistic amount of money. I think Pepe was supposed to be the kind of trademark signing that would try and propel them back into the top four, but he's not really worked out as well as they were hoping. Arsenal in a real difficult position. I don't really see how they get out of it. I think they're destined to struggle for a few years before they get themselves back towards the upper echelons of the table, because they're not going to be able to buy players really, and they don't really have any players that are worth selling. So yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 for them.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be major decisions that they're going to have to take for sure. And as we said, we were looking at the team that they played against and got beaten to, City. As we said, Sané looks to be heading out. He is, of all the Premier League, of all players that have assisted 25 or more goals in the Premier League, he is the second best minutes per assist ratio in the league. Second to Kevin De Bruyne, obviously. The other ones are Nani in third, which is a surprising one for me, at least. Dennis Bergkamp and Fabregas. So Leroy Sané, obviously we've all seen what he can do when he's fit. Is this a blow? To lose him? Is it a blow for City to lose him? And I don't know who wants to talk about it first, but is this going to hurt City?
Yeah, massively. I think particularly given the European ban that's supposed to be coming in, City are likely to lose. If it's for 2 years and they don't get it reduced, City are probably going to lose some of their best players, particularly Kevin De Bruyne. He's 29 now. I don't see him lingering around at the club for 2 years without Champions League football, particularly for a player of his quality. I'm sure Real Madrid would snap him up in an instant if they got close to being able to buy him. Looking at like Sergio Aguero's probably going to be leaving the next couple of years. David Silva's leaving this summer. City are actually set to be, Fernandinho's another name. City is set to be in a bit of a period of transition, and they need to be keeping their established young players in the squad. Leroy Sané, he's had his injuries problems this year, but he's a player who on his day is unbeatable in terms of a left winger. He's so quick. He can play on either wing. He scores goals. He provides, as we say, he's got an incredible assist to minutes ratio. I want to bring Fabregas into. I didn't realize Fabregas was that good because he played a lot of games in the Premier League and he's exceptional. But the point being that with the changes that are set to happen at Man City over the next couple of years, with that European ban, keeping players like Sané around was going to be pivotal to them maintaining not even title challenges. We're talking top four challenges. If City lose their best players, they're going to be struggling for those positions. So yeah, it's a really bad indictment of where City are going to be going over the next couple of years. That being said, it presents a very good opportunity for a side that wants to tempt Leroy Sané to join them. I expect it'll be Bayern Munich. If Bayern are capable of bringing him in, then they're going to be a formidable force, not just in the Bundesliga. He's not the kind of player who's just going to add an extra couple of points to them per season. This is a player who is going to see them challenge for European championships more so than they have ever have before. He would be an incredible signing for them.
Yeah, Joe. We'll talk Spurs United next, but any thoughts on the Sané news?
What surprises me mostly is the nature of it being so acrimonious, honestly. I mean, we've been having these rumours of Leroy Sané going to Bayern Munich for a long time, far longer than the FFP and alleged accountancy fraud, which could lead to, as we say, a 2-year European ban, which I do think Leroy Sané would be one of the first players to go in those circumstances. Without that ban and other players potentially leaving, I don't think City can't do without Leroy Sané. They have been, obviously they've been very impressive. They still won a league title without him playing so much. The issue is more that there's a reason why Leroy Sané hasn't been playing, and it's not because there are so many better players in the team. It's because he's been injured. If Man City can't convince him to stay and offer him minutes when he comes back at his best, then I don't know what the hell they're doing wrong. And, Luke's talking about the trajectory of Manchester City being very much a downward curve, European ban or not. This was unheard of 2 years ago. When we were talking about this in the RAW Sport studio a couple of years ago, the discussion, ironically, hilariously at the time, was that for the next 5 years or so, it would be Manchester City versus Tottenham Hotspur for the league in terms of how they'd structured their teams. just look at what Man City have done at the back. How they've gone from competent title winners to, just really not being able to defend very well at all. Certainly not, top 6 quality for most European leagues. The midfield, granted, they've got Kevin De Bruyne, who's amazing. But as Luke says, he'll be the first one to go if they get a European ban, because he is the best player in the Premier League by a country margin. Losing Leroy Sané in these circumstances is a much bigger blow than it otherwise would be. But I'm really surprised that someone as charismatic as Pep Guardiola, someone who can rotate his wingers as well as they have, and for one of the best teams in the country, definitely the one that suits Leroy Sané the most, can't convince him to stick around, even for the wages that he's on. That for me is really worrying from a financial and business perspective for Manchester City. Obviously, if I was him, I would go to Bayern Munich. I think they will win a Champions League in the next few years, but City should be able to hold on to someone like him.
I think one of the crucial differences, actually, Joe, is that Man City don't have. They almost have too much depth in a way. Leroy Sané.
But they've never struggled with that before, though.
No, but it will rub up certain players more than others. I think with Riyad Mahrez, he was in a situation where he was older when he joined the club. He's not. He's already proved himself. He's won the league with Leicester. He's come to the club. He's not coming for game time. He's coming to win titles. That's why he's there. I think with younger players like Leroy Sané, who are there for very much, in many cases, his development. I don't think Sané ever considered Man City to be the final destination. I think he probably always saw it as a player like Bayern Munich or Real Madrid, Barcelona. So for him to have a lot of, the amount of competition that he does have, it's not so much the competition, but the absence of game time at a top level is going to rub him up the wrong way. And I understand why he would then go and say, no, do you know what? I think I want to move away and try my luck elsewhere. I think it does make sense. I don't think it's as simple as City have the wages to pay and whatever they want. I think for certain players, it will be a matter of making sure they get as much game time as they possibly can.
And if this discussion was happening in 12 months' time, when Leroy Sané was 100% fit and at his best, I'd understand what you're saying. But there's a reason why Leroy Sané hasn't been playing. He's been injured. That's the thing. He can't get game time because he's been off the pitch. Has Pep Guardiola been unable to guarantee him game time in years to come? I understand what you mean. City do have an abundance of wingers, easily the most impressive wing depth in the Premier League. But even so, he's been injured. It's not like he's not been playing for a silly reason. They should be able to hold on to someone like him, especially someone as young as he is, if they're holding on to these European aspirations, which again is why this 2-year ban, which, I mean, I don't want to go into legally damaging territory, but from the figures I've seen, a 2-year European ban is light punishment for what they've done. In truth, this isn't just financial fair play irregularities, because most of the English top 6 will be suspected of this over the course of this summer. And if there aren't serious investigations into the likes of Arsenal and Manchester United, then something is going wrong. This isn't just FFP from Man City. This is alleged accountancy fraud. You see teams getting automatically relegated for this kind of thing outside the UK. If they don't get a European ban and this accountancy fraud is true, then there are going to be teams across Europe that are going to be furious about this, with the net spend that Manchester City have had already. But without these European competitions, as you say, Luke, this is the trajectory of this club. All of a sudden has gone from likely champions for several years to fighting for top 4. This could be the worst Manchester City that we see since the Saudi takeover.
Yeah, and your words just there just reminded me. I saw something earlier today, and it was Marseille. They breached FFP rules, and they were fined. I can't remember how much they were fined, but they ultimately got to keep their Champions League place for next season. So I don't know if that is if that's precedent, or I don't know if that's something to look at. But it's certainly interesting that Marseille were obviously able to do. I mean, I know
Marseille probably cooperated on it. Because Chelsea had a similar thing where they were done for, I don't know if it's financial fair play, but it was tapping up players and they got the transfer ban.
That was it. They didn't get any punishment for FFP. It was just
I think a lot of it is how the upfront the clubs are about it. If they breach FFP, that often, if they're willing to work with UEFA to kind of fix the problems that they had, look at why this happened, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again, UEFA tend to be a lot more forgiving with it. The problem is, I think Man City were hiding a lot of it and really being consciously embezzling money elsewhere so that they can get extra funds, and really cheating the system on quite a harsh level. So I think that's really what has dug under UEFA skin, and it's obviously something that's they're very keen not to set a precedent of being allowed to be repeated.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will await with keen interest. I believe the outcome is in mid-July, I believe, or I think it's mid-July. So we will find out soon enough their fate and what will happen to them. The other, I guess, big game that's taken place so far, Spurs United last night. Obviously, I am not in the UK, as some of you may know. I don't see the Sky Sports coverage, but certainly a certain pundit had a lot to say at halftime. But otherwise, what were your thoughts, Joe, on the game? Again, not a high-scoring game, and certainly a bit of rust all around. Yeah, I mean, Paul Pogba was back. He did his thing, and he won penalties. And Eric Dyer looked a little out of his depth. But yeah, what was your major takeaway from the game?
My first takeaway is what you've just said, Josh. A bit of rust and the slight mistakes of Eric Dyer might be a very tactful way of putting it. Not a good game overall. Again, I think the conditions somewhat justify it, but even so, I was disappointed by what I saw. Very telling that both of the goals in this game came from mistakes. The first one, a combined mistake. It wasn't just David De Gea. De Gea should have saved it, yes, but Harry Maguire's positioning and failure to track down Bergwijn was unbelievably poor. I mean, I actually haven't been that impressed by Harry Maguire this season, certainly not as impressed as other people at RAW Sport have been. Most expensive defender in the world. Maybe he is on his day, but in this game, he certainly didn't look like it. As for Eric Dyer, conceding that penalty in the second half, it's a really poor mistake to make. You could see how disappointed Mourinho was. As for the mistake a few moments later, there wasn't a mistake is the point. It was overturned by VAR. And yet again, I find it absolutely ridiculous that there is a so-called controversy around VAR. When a decision is made, it's wrong. VAR is used, it's shown to be wrong, and it's overturned. That's not a controversy. That's VAR doing its job. It's ultimately just a bunch of Manchester United fans irritated that they didn't get the decision they wanted. As for Roy Keane, just a quick point, because you said last night that you were looking forward to me going full Roy Keane on David Luiz. I'm not overall a fan of pundits speaking in that way, acting sort of like butthurt fans of their clubs. Roy Keane's comments, I do think, last night they were hilarious. But the dynamic between him and Patrice Evra in the studio, it doesn't seem very professional to me. Just as a side comment, just having pundits on and only really caring about one club, not really talking about Spurs in any meaningful way. Maybe there's a financial reason for that with how big Manchester United are, but it doesn't exactly sit well with me. The final point I'll make on it is the mistake that De Gea made. The fact that we have now had, I believe, basically 2 full seasons of David De Gea making these mistakes, having previously been probably the best goalkeeper in the Premier League. Ultimately, his confidence was shot from a poor World Cup with Spain. For me, that doesn't explain why he's been so error-prone in the last couple of years. Luke said to me when we were recording a podcast a few months ago that David De Gea should lose his position in the Spanish goal and it should go to Pau Lopez. At the time, I thought he was absolutely crazy. After the last, few months of Premier League fixtures, that actually makes a hell of a lot more sense. David De Gea's Spain position is in serious question after the last few months of these constant mistakes.
Yeah, and I'll ask Luke for your thoughts on those two teams and the game. But I got a bit of a brain teaser. Steven Bergwijn, he obviously scored last night, and he is the third player to have scored against both Manchester clubs in the Premier League. 2 other players have done so. And I don't know whether you want the rest of the show to kind of think this through, the 2 of you, or whether you're able to think. Yes, this season.
Adama Traore.
This comes courtesy of Richard Jolly from Twitter. No, that's incorrect.
Raul Jimenez.
Do you guys want thinking time? No, he hasn't either. Scored against both Manchester clubs in the Premier League this season. Steven Bergwijn is one. There's 2 others, and I don't know. We can.
No. I want to do this now. I want to do this now because it'll annoy me otherwise. Okay. Let's see what a Liverpool player has. Okay.
Jamie Vardy?
Incorrect.
Who scored?
I can give.
Who scored 3-1 against Man City? Is one any of them a Liverpool player?
Let me know if you guys want to hint or something. One is, yes.
One is a Liverpool player. Because did Salah score in that game? I don't remember. I think was Sadio Mane be one of them?
No, you were thinking correctly. Mo Salah is one.
Okay.
Yeah. So Salah, Bergwijn, and there's one more. Yeah.
Do they play
does
for a
not
top
play
6 club?
for any. No. Or at least in the current standings, no.
Not at least in the current.
English striker.
Danny Ings?
No. I've got a stab at Danny Ings to come, but no, not him.
No, not Danny Ings.
It's not Harry Kane, no.
No. Has not been capped by England, I don't think. But obviously he's played with the under-23s and under-21 England team. Nope.
Striker English.
The team geographically is very close to Liverpool.
Oh, Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Dominic Calvert-Lewin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Those are the three. Those are the three players who have scored against both Manchester clubs: Mo Salah, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Steven Bergwijn. So there we go. That is an elite club for sure. The other stat I want to get to, I guess I'll tease that out. I'll say it and maybe add that as a pretext to what I'm going to ask Luke. But Bruno Fernandes, since his debut, he's been involved in more goals than anyone else. 3 goals, 3 assists in the games that he's played. I mean, again, obviously his goal came from a penalty. That that isn't a huge thing to crow about necessarily. But again, he was very good for United against Spurs last night.
Yeah, I don't know if he was. So I have a thing with Bruno Fernandes, right? I don't think he's that good. I think he's decent, and I think he's exactly what Manchester United needed. But I don't think he's that good of a footballer. He seems to have it in this system. I mean, he's not that young. If he was young, I think I'd have less of a problem with it. But he seems to, every time he gets the ball, he always wants to shoot. Every time, even if he's like 25, 30 yards from goal, he just has a pop. And that frustrates me quite a lot. I don't think he actually played very well yesterday, because he kind of has this thing where he gets into positions where he's making things happen. And even if that's having a shot from 30 yards, but he doesn't seem to always make the right decision in the final third. It's always, let's have a shot. And I just don't think he's that good. I sort of watched him yesterday. I thought, yeah, there's obviously a good player here. Yes, he obviously has quality. I'm not denying that. But I wouldn't want him at Liverpool. There's certain players I say, like, even to an extent, like with Paul Pogba, with Kevin De Bruyne, with David Silva. I watched them. I think, yeah, I would want them in my Liverpool team. I don't have any inkling of that with Bruno Fernandes. I just think he gets the ball, he shoots. He's good on the ball. He's got quality, and he can take a set piece well. He's comfortable with penalties, great. But I don't think he's all that they're making him out to be. I think he's a bit overhyped.
Interesting.
That was probably going to come. I say that, and then he goes and scores like 50 goals next season and becomes probably his greatest of all time midfielder. But right now, I get why people are hyping him up. I just don't think he's worthy of the hype.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I mean, I don't know, Joe. I don't know what your opinion is on Bruno Fernandes, but do you agree that this is a bit of a honeymoon period for him, and then next season we'll get to see, can he sustain this form for a whole year? What's your take?
Historical precedent when it comes to these new signings at Manchester United doing well indicates that it's going to be a short-term thing, and I have emphasised that whenever I've talked about Manchester United's supposed increase in form in the last few months, is that every time this happens, we get our hopes up for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's United, and then they just disappoint us more and more again afterwards. I do think Bruno Fernandes is a great player. There's a reason why he commanded that transfer fee. But I also don't believe he's, the unbelievable world beater that some are making him out to be. By some, I do, of course, mean Manchester United fans and English pundits. The thing is, I've seen Bruno Fernandes play in Italy for several years prior to his move to Sporting Lisbon. And although he clearly had an awful lot of talent, he was no better than the players that he was around when he was at Sampdoria, especially. Now, the argument that's been made by some pundits is that he's very reliant on the players around him, getting him into those positions where, as Luke says, he'll take a shot from 30 yards and sometimes it'll go in. And maybe there is some truth to that, because at least on paper, the Manchester United midfielders are a hell of a lot better than what he was playing at Sampdoria and at Sporting Lisbon. but I also don't believe he's like an all-around midfielder. I don't. It is very much a honeymoon period. He's kind of unique in the Manchester United midfield as well. There's no one else that's really like him. He's difficult to coach against in that particular way. I don't personally believe he's going to be a long-term star in the Premier League. It is, as with so many players before at Manchester United, a short-term honeymoon phase. The question is that can he be a good player after he comes in? Because what we've seen with a lot of these United players is they start really well and then they go bad very quickly. The question for Fernandes is, can he continue to be a good player in their team? That for me is the real difference.
I can say for certainty, if Dan Ralph is watching or listening, or if he's somewhere under a rock that needs enticing back onto a RAW Sport stream, I think we've got the content for him to certainly pull him along and bring him back on for sure. I guess that, I mean, we'll see what happens with United and Spurs. I think United, I can't remember who these two teams play next. I think off the top of my head, I cannot remember. I'll look for that at some point. I guess the other games, I don't know if you guys have any takes on the other games. Obviously, Villa goals draw at home to Sheffield United. Obviously, big controversy. They were not given a goal even though the ball crossed the line. Hawkeye have since apologized. I don't know, an unlucky one for Villa. Stop me if you guys have anything to say about each game.
No. On that one, I actually feel this was a sort of no one wins situation. Hawkeye, except for Aston Villa, they won. But Hawkeye, this is something they couldn't predicted. I completely understand why this happened. What I would like to see though is just what changes as a result of this. For one, I mean, this is a freak thing. This isn't something we're likely to see potentially ever again. But I think that we should be giving VAR legislation or the power to review Hawkeye goal decisions just as a second check. It takes 2 seconds. We saw it in that game. It took 2 seconds for Hawkeye to check the VAR. For us to check the VAR, we knew from the camera that it went in, so that would have allowed them to give it. So in that instance, I think, do you know what? I think they should, with all Hawkeye goals or like anything that's close, just give it a very quick check. It takes 5-10 seconds, and then go from there. Because most of them, 9 times out of 10, it will get confirmed. So most of them will be pretty clear cut. If it's not very clear cut, and for whatever reason Hawkeye fails, then yeah, maybe look into it. Then maybe you need to review the goal decision system entirely. But this probably won't happen again. But they need to make sure that it doesn't happen again, because if it happens once, that means that it could happen a few more times. They just need to be very careful with it. But yeah, as I said, feel bad for Sheffield United. They, last time they're in the Premier League in 2006-07 season, they got messed up by the Premier League failing to legislate against West Ham's transfer of Carlos Tevez, and now they get messed up by the goal decision system. Albeit this isn't going to cost them a relegation, but it could cost them European football, which again it's a financial thing. Without that, and particularly with COVID going on, they're going to lack money next year. If they don't finish in a top 4 position, top 6 position, they should probably look at taking some sort of legal action in this game.
Yeah, and they've got a big game at Old Trafford on Wednesday night, which will go a long way into kind of working out the outcome between 5th and 6th, so it is a big game for them. Like I said, I'm just going to run through the other games, so stop me if you have anything to say about them. Southampton picked up a 3-0 win at Norwich. Only Southampton have won more away Premier League games than any other team except the top 4, which is an interesting stat. And also, Richard Jolly on Twitter, Danny Ings is the first player in Premier League history to score in August, September, October, November, December, January, February, and June in the same season, which is he's certainly had a great season for sure. Joe, did you wanted to say something on this game?
Yeah, I mean, again, you can't read too much into Southampton's performance, but I can certainly read into Norwich's defending. That is some of the worst defending I've ever seen in top flight football, especially for Danny Ings' goal, just all trying to crowd around him, but not really going in for any significant challenge or blockage. The goal that Sky Sports thinks is so impressive from Danny Ings is made a hell of a lot simpler by just how poor that defending is. Norwich City, it honestly looks like they've stopped trying. Like that is one of the worst games I've seen in a long time from them. Dreadful defending.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was a game that I don't want to say it was a must-win, but this was the type of game that they needed to win to kind of get.
Oh, they're not staying up. They needed at least a draw in this game. There's no way Norwich stay up now after that. And if they defend like that, they don't deserve to. Simple as that.
Yeah, apologies to our fellow exec member Toby. I fear you will be watching Championship football next season. And the other game, as we said earlier today, Watford drew 1-1 at home to Leicester. From all accounts, I haven't seen the game, but from all accounts, Ben Chilwell netted a really great equaliser. Luke,
both the goals in that game were incredible. By all accounts, it wasn't a great match for 89 minutes. And then Ben Chilwell goes, and it was a really terrific finish from Ben Chilwell. I've been a massive critic of him this year, particularly in his defensive play. But going forward, he is very good. You can kind of see, given he's only 23 years old and putting in an attacking performance like that and getting that goal at a crucial time, you can see why Chelsea want to fork out so much money for him. On the other hand, you have Craig Dawson, who is probably the most average Premier League centre-back I have ever seen, ever. But he goes and scores a bicycle kick in the last minute to take all 3 points away from Leicester and actually give Watford a very important point. It's going to come down to margins. Yeah. It's all about marginal situations at the bottom of the table right now. Watford needed something from this game. So for them to go and grab a last-minute goal, I just wonder what that's going to do psychologically going into consequent games, particularly when it's coming against a team that are at the top of the table, which they've actually traditionally done pretty well against this year. Obviously, they were the only team to beat Liverpool so far this season. Big stuff from the Nigel Pearson side. I think this sort of thing is what's going to give Watford the edge. I think they just have, with Nigel Pearson, they seem to have this psychological edge that I don't think the other sides have, particularly at West Ham. Bournemouth, I think, on the decline. Aston Villa concede too many goals. But I think that mental edge, even though Watford, the quality of their side is kind of similar to those sides around them, I do think that Nigel Pearson's got a bit of a never say die mentality in them, which will serve them well coming at the end of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, Nigel Pearson against his old team and gets a point out of it. So pretty good stuff from them. And then I guess the games tomorrow. Well, we've got Brighton Arsenal, and from all accounts that is still goalless with 54 minutes played or so. Tonight we have, I believe it's West Ham Wolves later on, and then Bournemouth at home to Crystal Palace, and then 3 games tomorrow: Newcastle, Sheffield United, Villa, Chelsea, and then the Merseyside derby, which should be. I know Luke will take special interest in that game. Just a quick word on that one. I presume we know Liverpool are the better team. We saw Liverpool's second team go out and beat Everton in the FA Cup earlier this season. So I'm guessing you're just expecting a Liverpool win.
Yeah, the only thing will be sort of the impact of COVID on both teams. We know what fills me with more confidence than if this had happened a couple of years ago. So Liverpool nowadays are able to control games a lot better. So previously, in the early stages of Jurgen Klopp, it was rock and roll football. It was reliant on players being fit enough to chase the opposition for 90 minutes end on end. That Liverpool side would be massively struggling going into this business end of the season. Not only have you got games in short periods of time, but you have as players that haven't run around and pitch for 90 minutes for over 3 months now. I think that's what Liverpool will give Liverpool an edge in this match. The other question marks you have, just general player fitness. I know Mohamed Salah's been a bit of a question mark over this game. He has been in training today. So if he can start tomorrow, that'll be a massive boost to Jurgen Klopp's squad. Then you also have the question of Richarlison's had some choice words about Virgil van Dijk this week. I don't know if you guys have seen that. He said that Van Dijk was overhyped as an English football, as a player playing in England, and the Marquinhos, Thiago Silva, and Sergio Ramos were all better players than him. Having watched a lot of Sergio Ramos this season, I would say right now Sergio Ramos is not a better player than Virgil van Dijk. Can't speak for the other two, but I know that Marquinhos has mostly been playing in central midfield, and I know that Thiago Silva is aging and likely to leave PSG at the end of this season.
Yeah.
There are definitely centre-backs that have played better than Virgil van Dijk this season. It is not the ones he's listed, though.
Well, if you listen to...
Who would you say has been then, Joe?
I would say overall, Stefan de Vrij has been more impressive than him. On balance, I wouldn't say Koulibaly, actually.
Granted, it's not.
Koulibaly's still great, but he hasn't, like Van Dijk, he hasn't been as good as his amazing best last year. It's not many. The salient point is the three players he listed. Thiago Silva is not the defensive star for PSG. Marquinhos isn't even a centre-back anymore. And Sergio Ramos, he's still great, but he's also very Sergio Ramos. And this year,
he's also not the best. He's not even the best centre-back at Real Madrid. Like Rafael Varane is exceptional. My point is that Richarlison's going to go into this game with a point to prove. He couldn't even beat Nat Phillips in their game against Liverpool at Anfield in the FA Cup. He's now on loan at Zweite Bundesliga side, VfB Stuttgart. So he's got to put his money where his mouth is. He's got to get a goal. You've got the other thing as well of players who's going to start in that Liverpool midfield. I think the 5 substitution rule is actually going to serve Liverpool quite well. I would expect Jurgen Klopp to do wholesale changes of his midfield throughout the match. Like, essentially have 2 sets of midfielders that he will interchange as the match develops. So I think you'll see the likes of Curtis Jones getting some game time for Liverpool. I would expect to see Harvey Elliott and maybe a little bit of Xherdan Shaqiri. He's liked game time all season, but has looked relatively decent when he has played. There's the other one as well, and a player who I think is being quite overlooked, particularly in the wake of Timo Werner, is Takumi Minamino. He's joined the club. He joined the club in January. It's a horrible time to settle in, for one. Second of all, he was mostly playing FA Cup matches, which are traditionally against very physical opponents. He's more of a technical player. He's not going to have the physicality to be able to cope with those players having played in Austria all year. But by all accounts, this break has actually served him quite well in terms of his ability to settle into the club a little bit more, settle into British society as a whole a little bit more. And the comments have been coming out this week that he's much more prepared, and it feels like he's a much more integrated member of the squad right now, which is big because he's the only player who can replicate Roberto Firmino's role, and Firmino is not going to be able to play week in, week out with the rate of matches that can be played, and the fact that he's not run for 3 months. So Minamino could be a really big part of Liverpool's play coming into the run-in.
Yep. Yeah, and for sure, and you see what Bayern are doing, and being able to rotate their squad, and you will imagine Liverpool will do something similar. The other, I guess, major game in the midweek, because we probably won't have we will have an interesting. If you're interested in the championship, and I know we'll touch upon it briefly in the next bit, but we have something coming up this week which should be exciting. So if you're interested in the championship, keep watching our socials. But we mentioned Sheffield United. I guess the big marquee game on Thursday night would be Chelsea-Man City. Obviously, Chelsea want to shore up top four place. City in a weird spot where I guess they're not really. There's nothing that they're necessarily fighting for, and with the European ban pending, I guess there's not much, a whole lot they can do much about that either. So it'll be interesting to see how those two teams approach that game, and that should that'll probably be enough for our little Premier League discussion until next week. We will do a bit of a score. We'll do a little bit of a quick score update. Joe, I know there's been action in the Leipzig Dortmund game.
Yeah. Well, the game is basically over at this stage. Final whistle has literally just gone. Erling Braut Haaland doubled Borussia Dortmund's lead on the 93rd minute. I'll tell you what, every time I go back into from this game, I haven't seen it consistently, so I can't give you a detailed report. But honestly, I've been very impressed by what I've seen from both sides. Definitely, some of the better teams in European football this year. On another day, Leipzig really could have won this. They were just ultimately undone by 2 great individual moments from Haaland, who's been been... honestly, let's not even go into that. We're running out of words to describe Erling Braut Haaland. But Dortmund, good value for second place in the league. Leipzig, guaranteed Champions League football this late in the season. They absolutely deserve it. They did very well to knock out Tottenham Hotspur, absolutely humiliated them. As for Dortmund, unlucky to go out against PSG themselves. So, really good showing from German football towards the end of this year. Deserve win for Dortmund. Might just keep Lucien Favre his job.
I was going to mention that point, but yeah, you covered it there. Favre will definitely relish in that victory. Bit of an update, still goalless at the Amex Stadium between Brighton and Arsenal. Athletic Club, or Bilbao, have taken a 1-0 lead at home to Real Betis. Inigo Martinez has scored to put them 1-0.
Betis are so bad. Betis are so atrocious.
I tell you what, Inigo Martinez is one of the most underrated centre-backs in Europe.
I agree. Fundamentally, yeah. He's been at the top of La Liga football for... God, like probably 7 or 8 years now. He's a great player, but oh my word, Real Betis since the restart, they were pretty poor before the restart. I think Ruby is the coach. Ruby, I think he's really on the ropes now. I do not see him continuing his contract into next season. Betis are not very good. They low key. If they don't pick up points in their next couple of games after this, we could be considering them as potential relegation candidates. Actually, then if the results go the wrong way, particularly if Celta Vigo and Espanyol start picking up a couple of wins, Betis could actually find themselves dragged into it, which nobody really expected at the start of the after lockdown ended. The kind of like. We expected them to just sort of push on and maybe get around 40 to 45 points and just sort of comfortably survive. But yeah, they're not in a good spot right now. Just seem to be sapped of all confidence in the squad.
Yeah. It's almost as if they're the next Hertha Berlin in waiting for some manager to inspire them back into a top half finish. A quick round out of the Bundesliga. Bas Dost equalized for Eintracht Frankfurt. They got a draw at Cologne. Düsseldorf Augsburg finished 1-1. Mainz went on to pick up they scored again through Edmilson Fernandez to make it a 3-1 win over Werder Bremen. Gladbach pick up a 3-1 win at pretty much relegated Paderborn. Luke Edwards' Hertha Berlin pick up a 2-0 win at Leverkusen, so pretty decent.
I saw the second goal. Yeah, I saw the second goal actually. So it came from Dodi Luca Bacchio, who was they bought from Watford in the summer. But all the good work again, it was done by Christoph Piontek. Would you believe it? Yeah, balls played to him from Mateusz Cunha. He dribbles past Piontek picks up the ball, dribbles past 2 players, and he even takes it past the goalkeeper. Goalkeeper dives. It's a superb bit of striking play, kind of Fernando Torres-esque. And then he's about to tap it in, and then Luca Bacchio goes and steals the goal away from him. Very sad. But Christoph Piontek really looking like a new player in that Hertha Berlin side. We've had a lot of negative words about Piontek this season, Joe, but it seems like tentatively, he's getting back on his feet at Hertha Berlin. And you know what? If this leads to him, a big part of actually being a top class striker is the ability to have a poor run of form. Having, you do well, and then you have a poor run of form where you're not getting goals, things aren't working for you, and then it's the ability to bring it back to the level that you were at, and it seems like Christoph Piontek's really starting to do that. So that's not big. Not only it's not very so much a big deal for this season in terms of his own confidence, but going into next season, Piontek's going to have established himself as a top striker in the Hertha Berlin side, which bodes well going into next year, and they're challenging for European spots.
And it's also, just as a final point on this, another indictment of AC Milan for all the money they've spent. I think the 4th highest net spend in Europe over the last 5 years. Yes, Gattuso actually got the best out of him last year before he got sacked. The 2 managers they had, Gianpaolo and Stefano Pioli, this season so far, did not get the best out of Christoph Piontek at Milan. He stagnated in the same, almost to the same extent that Paquetá and Biglia did. It's another example of Milan just not being able to get the best out of all the money they've spent. I'm really happy for him, though. He deserves it. He's a really hard-working player on a personal level.
Massively.
Yeah, so he absolutely deserves this.
Yeah, and we will quickly touch upon Serie A as we're going to run a little over. But the other two results, Wolfsburg, I mean, David Wagner's Schalke is really in free fall. They lost 4-1 at home to Wolfsburg. They have been. Rabat Matanda did score for Schalke though. For those keeping an eye on him, certainly Welsh fans for sure. And then finally, Hoffenheim picked up a 4-0 win at home to Union Berlin. So the final two games with victorious teams were scoring 4 goals each. So yeah, a quick kind of look. I mean, the championship obviously restarted today. Leeds and West Brom are pretty much in the driver's seat to get promotion, and I imagine, and we'll keep this discussion brief. We've got something coming up, as I said, on Thursday, so keep an eye on that for more detail. But I'm guessing from you two, you're both expecting those two teams to go up, and then I guess the intriguing bit is who comes out of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think Leeds have pretty much got it in the bag. Dare I say it, touch wood, all that good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think what Marcelo Bielsa has done there, not so much in terms of, I think Leeds have a lot of quality in their squad, but I think the problem Leeds have had has been psychological over the past few years. They've had a collection or a portfolio of top sides, and they've just never been able to get over the line. And it finally seems like under Bielsa, with the squad that they have, that they're finally actually going to get promoted. It's been far too long for a club of their size to be out of the Premier League. They'll be desperate to be back. It's going to be interesting to see how they do next year. I mean, I can't really speak for. I haven't watched a lot of Leeds this season, but they play an exciting round of football. I just don't know if that's going to fly in the Premier League. We'll wait and see. And then as for West Brom, again, I've watched absolutely no Championship football really this year at all. But West Brom statistically look like a very solid side. They've got a lot of good young players in particular in their side. So that's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be a very different side to the one that we saw leave the Premier League 2 years ago. So that could also be very exciting. But no, both sides doing very well.
Yep. Yeah, Joe, I don't know if you have anything to add before we look at Serie A, or
I mean, there's not a huge amount to say about Serie A, but I haven't got a huge amount to say about the Championship either. I think Leeds and West Brom pretty good value for first and second in the league. Very good seasons overall. West Brom, especially in the attacking sense, have been often electrifying in the Championship this year. Not just against the really bad teams towards the bottom of the table, actually against some very good sides as well. As for the other team to come up, it's gotten a lot less competitive just before lockdown came in. The teams in third, fourth, and fifth, Fulham, Brentford, and Forest, have some distance, only 4 points, but some distance nonetheless to Preston behind them. I think it'll be one of those three coming up. On current form, I would not be surprised to see Nottingham Forest back in the Premier League as well, which would be another great story. Along with Leeds United, that's a club that, size-wise speaking, deserves to be in the Premier League, every few years or so. Saying that though, I haven't been sufficiently impressed by any of these sides to believe that they'll stay in the Premier League for a long time. There was a lot of good stuff said about Norwich, Villa, even Cardiff a couple of years ago before they came up. We all know how it turned out. I don't think we're going to be seeing any of these teams really kick on in the Premier League, but I'd like to see Leeds and Forest get promoted. And West Brom.
Certainly, if Leeds get promoted and they keep Bielsa for next season, that'll be a very interesting one to watch. I just like the idea of him on his bucket at the various Premier League stadiums. For me, that's going to be an intriguing sight. You touched upon it. There's not a whole lot we can say about Serie A. Obviously, the Coppa Italia final and semi-finals played out over the last week or so. Napoli pick up their sixth title. They defeated Juventus on penalties. Gattuso he won it, and then afterwards admitting that he would keep about 70-80% of this squad he was expecting to keep, and 10 to 20 going. We touched upon Koulibaly. It's expected he might go. I don't know if any of you watched the final between Napoli or Juventus, but you did, Joe. So do you want? Did you have many takeaways, many thoughts on it?
I mean, my first takeaway was that it wasn't a very good final. The fact it was goalless and then going to penalties kind of indicates that Napoli. I mean, I don't think the teams played overwhelmingly poorly by any means, far from their best. Hardly surprising coming back from lockdown. I'm kind of glad that the FIGC have put the Coppa Italia before the rest of Serie A. Just get it out of the way, because interesting, it was kind of waning. Put the end of the Serie A season in, because there's a hell of a lot of stories there. The battle for top four, and of course the genuine title fight between Juve, Lazio, and potentially even Inter if they resurge. As for the Coppa Italia final, I'm really happy that Gattuso got a win. Napoli have had a turbulent season, to say the very least. They were the better team. Gattuso's actually done quite a lot of good work with them. They deserve it. As for the games that are coming up tonight, Torino versus Parma and Hellas Verona versus Cagliari, not exactly the marquee fixtures that a lot of other leagues would schedule to kick off the leagues again. But some interesting stories there. Teams that are far higher up the table than you'd expect versus especially Torino, far closer to the relegation zone than you'd expect. Promises to be interesting. I'm not overly optimistic for how good the games are going to be. I don't know if I'll actually watch them, but excited to have Serie A back, goes without saying.
Yeah, and it should be mentioned that Inter kick off their restart of the season against Sampdoria tomorrow, and then on Monday night we have Bologna versus Juventus, Lecce versus Milan, and then I think for me the game of the week for Serie A would be Atalanta Lazio on Wednesday, which should be a very interesting game to watch. I mean, I've got the top of the table. I've got the top and the bottom, but we'll quickly look at the top. I mean, is it a 3-horse race for the title? Do you think either of you? Do you think it'll be a 3-horse race when it comes down to it, or?
I think it's saying 2-horse race by now.
It's two. Inter could resurge in like post-COVID conditions. They could improve, especially with how well Conte physically conditions.
And they've got a game in hand as well, I believe.
Yeah, but right now we'll keep it as a 2-horse race.
Yeah, I agree.
And honestly, on current form, I think Lazio are going to do it. And you know how much that pains me to say.
Wow.
I think I'm in agreement with Joe. I think psychologically, the damage that this Coppa Italia defeat could do to this Juventus side, we saw with Barcelona under Valverde when they were beaten by Valencia in the Copa del Rey final last year, and just the impact that had subsequently on their performances under Valverde. I think it's going to be the same with Juventus. I think there's already a bit of an atmosphere of uncertainty around Maurizio Sarri, and I mean, Joe and I were discussing this in our podcast. We don't think Sarri is necessarily the right man for the job at Juventus, and Lazio, on the other hand, seem to have a kind of a pressure-free. There's no expectation on them to go and win the league, but that's kind of working in their favour. They're in the perfect position where they're just sort of niggling at Juventus's heels. And what that can result in is them just managing to catch them up sort of towards the end of the season. Juventus potentially bottle it, and Lazio, with the organisation they have under Simone Inzaghi, go and take the W. I would actually expect Lazio to go and win the league this year, purely on a psychological basis of the damage that this Coppa Italia final defeat could do to Juventus.
Yeah. And they've also, to quickly butt in, they've got some of the most individually impressive players in world football this season as well. Ciro Immobile up front. Just look at the amount of goals he scored. He wins so many penalties as well. Luis Alberto's been one of the most consistent assisters in European football this year. Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, if you know who he is, you know how brilliant he is. And as for centre-backs, you were asking me, centre-backs that have been as good or better than Virgil van Dijk. Francesco Acerbi is one of the best signings I've seen in Serie A in the last few years. Immense all season long. They're good value for the title if they get it.
I mean, full disclosure to people watching, we haven't discussed Serie A off air, so that was my genuine reaction to hearing that you two are both picking Lazio for the Scudetto. That is, wow. This is good. I mean, and to talk about parallels, I mean, I don't want to jinx it and say they're going to do a Leicester, but like both teams in common have a very good goal scoring threat in Immobile and Vardy. They both had that, so. Definitely an intriguing one, and yeah, we'll see what happens at Inter if they can do it, if not, if they can come back or not. But certainly intrigue as well with the Champions League spot race. Atalanta, Roma, maybe Napoli can get themselves into it. It'll be definitely an interesting one to watch, but we'll probably cover that more when we've had some game time and action to watch. Probably the last thing we just wanted to give a shout out to was to FC Rostov. A very interesting story. I know Luke, you know it very well. Do you want to explain it in the summary?
So So Rostov were playing against.
I've got some notes here.
Sochi.
Yeah. So Rostov were up against Sochi, and Rostov, prior to the match, had a situation where 6 or 7 of their players, I believe it was, tested positive for COVID-19, which means that they had to quarantine their whole squad, or pretty much their 42 fittest players. So I assume that includes a lot of their reserve players as well. So what they had to do instead, so they were lacking any form of anyone from their first team, more or less. So they had to instead play their under-17 side in a Russian Premier League game against PFC Sochi. And it didn't end particularly well for them. Sochi beat them 10-1. With Alexander Kokorin, who's the Russian national team striker, who managed to get himself a hat trick. What's hilarious as well is that Rostov scored in the first minute to make it 1-0 to them, and then conceded 10 goals in succession. And I saw a quote on Twitter which said, "If anything, Rostov scored too early," which I thought was quite funny. But they got absolutely annihilated. And what makes it even more funny is that the goalkeeper for Rostov is a guy called Popov. Broke the record for most saves in a single game by a Russian Premier League goalkeeper. So he broke the saving record and also conceded 10 goals in the same game, which is brilliant. But I also feel quite bad for them. But at the same time, like, if you're a under-17 striker and you get the opportunity to play Russian Premier League football, that's something to tick off the bucket list at the very least.
Yeah, and indeed, FC Sochi turned down the offer to postpone the game, as that was the initial plan, and then Sochi didn't want to. So yeah, Rostov were forced to send in their academy team, and they certainly made history.
There's the thing as well. The player who scored for Rostov is called Roman Romanov, which is funny.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, that is a little funny. But Rostov is still 4th in the Russian top flight for anyone who's actually very interested in the Russian top flight. Sochi remain in 9th, and the big game tonight is a CSKA versus Zenit St. Petersburg. So that is, I mean, 2 teams that you've probably seen around in the Champions League a lot in the group, certainly in the group stage, and certainly in recent times. I think United have traveled to CSKA. I think in City have played them as well. So yeah, that's a intriguing game at the top end of that league. But I think, and that's where we're going to leave it there. And that's where we're going to leave this 2-hour or so discussion on the return of football. Thank you if you've made it this far. Thank you for watching this Quaran stream. I'd like to thank Luke Edwards and Joe Spanieri for joining me on this ramble across Europe. And we'll be back for probably our final stream next week, with next week being the last week of term. We will probably return with our final official Quaran stream then. So hope everyone stays safe and enjoy this weekend's action.